Hey guys, tonight we begin with the disgusting, weevil-infested, and surprisingly crunchy world of sailors' food on Long Voyages, where every meal was a gamble between malnutrition and food poisoning, and your dinner had a decent chance of crawling away before you could eat it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the deck of a merchant ship in 1720, 3 months into a 6-month voyage from England to the Caribbean. The salt spray hits your face. The deck rolls beneath your feet. Your stomach is growling. It has been growling for 3 months straight, not because you are not eating, but because what you are eating can barely be called food. Welcome to maritime dining, where the menu hasn't changed in 200 years, and wouldn't pass a health inspection for another 150. Let's start with the star of the show, the food item that defined naval cuisine for centuries. Hardtack. If you've heard of hardtack, you probably think it is just hard bread. That is like calling the Titanic a minor boating accident. Hardtack wasn't bread. It was a weapon disguised as food. Hardtack was made from flour, water, and salt. That is it. No yeast, no butter, no flavour, no mercy. The dough was rolled flat, cut into squares roughly the size of your hand, maybe 4 inches by 4 inches, and baked. Not baked once, baked multiple times. Baked until every molecule of moisture had evacuated in terror. Baked until the result was harder than wood. Actually harder than wood. Wood you could whittle. Hardtack would break your knife. The texture was roughly equivalent to ceramic tile. The taste was somewhere between cardboard and disappointment. Each piece weighed about half a pound, which doesn't sound like much until you realise you were expected to eat several of these per Dalton yaw. Your jaw would ache from chewing. Your teeth would crack. Literally crack. Sailors lost teeth trying to eat hardtack. Breaking a tooth on your dinner was not an accident. It was Tuesday. But here is the thing about hardtack. It lasted forever. And by forever, I mean years. Decades. Even. There are documented cases of hardtack being stored for 30, 40, 50 years, and still being edible. Well, edible is a generous word. Still being hard enough to qualify as food-shaped object. This longevity was the whole point. You couldn't take fresh bread on a 6-month voyage. It would mould within a week. But hardtack. Hardtack was basically immortal. Too dry to mould. Too hard to rot. The perfect food for long voyages. If your definition of perfect includes 0 nutritional value. And the consistency of a brick. So how did you eat it? Good question. Terrible answer. You had options. None of them pleasant. Option 1. Bite it directly. This required the jaw strength of a crocodile and the dental fortitude of someone who didn't value their teeth. You'd gnaw on a corner, trying to break off a piece, small enough to chew. Sometimes this worked. Sometimes you just sat there, mouth clamped on a piece of hardtack, waiting for your saliva to soften it enough to bite through. This could take minutes. You looked ridiculous. Everyone looked ridiculous. Nobody cared because everyone was doing it. Option 2. Soak it. You dunk your hardtack in whatever liquid was available. Coffee, if you were lucky. Tea, if you were less lucky. Water, if you were unlucky. Seawater, if you were desperate. The hardtack would absorb the liquid and soften slightly. Slightly, it went from ceramic tile to very stale bread. An improvement, technically. Still terrible. Option 3. Break it into pieces and add it to soup or stew. This was actually the most common method. You'd smash the hardtack with something heavy, a hammer, a belaying pin, the butt of a musket, until it broke into chunks. Then you toss the chunks into whatever was cooking. They'd absorb liquid and become soggy bread pieces floating in your soup. This masked the texture somewhat. Did nothing for the taste. But we haven't gotten to the best part yet. The part that makes hardtack truly special. The part that earned it the nickname Worm Castles. The weevils. Oh, the weevils. Little beetles. Maybe the size of a grain of rice. That infested stored grain. They got into the flour. They got baked into the hardtack. And then, in the warm, humid environment of a ship's hold, they hatched. You'd bite into your hardtack and find it full of little white larvae, wriggling, very much alive. Experienced sailors had a technique for this. You didn't eat hardtack in daylight. You ate it in the dark, or you ate it with your eyes closed, because what you couldn't see couldn't disturb you. Out of sight, out of mind, into your mouth, into your stomach. Extra protein, as they say. Some sailors would tap their hardtack on the table before eating. Knock, knock, knock. The vibration would make the weevils crawl out. You'd see little white larvae emerging from holes in the hardtack, dropping onto the table. You'd brush them off. Then you'd eat the hardtack anyway, because weevil-free hardtack was still hardtack, and you were still hungry. The really infested pieces, the ones that were more weevil than biscuit, had a special quality. They were softer. The weevils had eaten through the interior, creating a honeycomb structure. Easier to chew. Some sailors actually preferred the weevily ones. Not because they tasted better, because they were less likely to break your teeth. When your food choices are jaw-breakingly hard or full of insects, sometimes insects win. There is a documented account from a sailor in 1805 who described breaking open a piece of hardtack and finding it so full of weevils that it moved of its own accord. The hardtack was crawling across his plate under its own power. He ate it anyway, because the alternative was going hungry, and hunger beats disgust every single time. But wait, there is more, because weevils weren't the only inhabitants of hardtack. There were also maggots. Not from weevils. Different maggots. Fly larvae. Flies would get into the storage areas, lay eggs on the hardtack, and the eggs would hatch. You'd have little white maggots crawling around in your food supply. The official Navy regulation was that hardtack with visible maggots should be discarded. In practice, nobody discarded food. Food was too valuable, too scarce. You picked off what you could see and ate the rest. The maggots you couldn't see wouldn't hurt you. Probably. Maybe. Well, you'd find out. And here is a detail that'll really make your skin crawl. The sound. At night, in the quiet of the lower decks, you could hear the weevils. Thousands of them boring through the hardtack stored in barrels. A faint chittering, clicking sound. The sound of your food being eaten by bugs before you could eat it. Sailors called it the sound of the biscuits singing. Poetic, disgusting. Accurate. Your daily ration of hardtack was typically 1 pound. That is roughly 4 large pieces. This was supposed to be your main source of calories. 4 pieces of rock, hard weevil, infested, taste-free flour tiles. Every day, for months, for years if you were a career sailor, you'd eat thousands of these in a lifetime, crack dozens of teeth, consume countless weevils, and you'd never ever enjoy it. But hardtack was just the beginning. Let's talk about the meat. Oh boy, let's talk about the meat. Salt pork and salt beef were the protein sources on Long Voyages. Notice the word salt in both of those. Salt was the preservative, the only preservative. You took a piece of pork or beef, packed it in salt, stored it in a barrel, and hoped it lasted. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. You found out when you opened the barrel, usually several months into the voyage. The salting process was brutal. The meat was packed in so much salt that it was essentially mummified. The salt drew out all moisture, prevented bacterial growth, turned the meat into something resembling shoe leather. Hard, dry, impossibly salt. So salty that you couldn't eat it without soaking it first. The standard procedure was to soak salt meat in fresh water for 24 hours before cooking. This leached out some of the salt. Some, not all, not even most. The meat would still be incredibly salty. Mouth-puckeringly, thirst-inducingly salty. You'd eat your salt pork and immediately need to drink a pint of water. Except the water was also terrible. But we'll get to that. The meat that came out of the barrels was often grey. Not the healthy grey of fresh meat. A sad, dead grey. Sometimes greenish. Sometimes with an iridescent sheen, like an oil slick. This was normal, expected. You cooked it anyway. The texture was wrong in ways that are hard to describe. It wasn't quite meat anymore. It had been so heavily salted and aged that it had become something else. Fibrous, stringy, resistant to chewing. You'd gnaw on a piece of salt pork, and it would just sit there in your mouth, refusing to break down. Eventually, you'd just swallow it, and let your stomach deal with it. The taste was salt, just salt. Whatever flavour the pork or beef had originally possessed had been murdered by salt and thyme. Every bite was a salt bomb. You tasted nothing else. Your entire mouth was salt. Your tongue felt like sandpaper. You'd drink water to wash it down, and the water would taste salty, because your entire mouth was coated in salt. But at least this was meat that had been somewhat edible when it went into the barrel. Sometimes the meat was already questionable when it was salted. Older animals. diseased animals, animals that died of causes other than intentional slaughter. This all went into the salt barrels, because dead animal was dead animal, and once it was salted, who could tell the difference? There are records of sailors finding recognizable body parts in their salt meat. A cow's eyeball, a pig's ear, complete with bristles, identifiable sections of intestine. These would float to the surface when you were boiling the meat. You'd fish them out, or you wouldn't. Depended on how hungry you were. The worst part about salt meat was when it had gone off despite the salt. This happened more often than you'd think. Improperly salted meat. Barrels that leaked. Storage in hot, humid conditions. The meat would rot, but not normal rot. Salt-preserved rot. The meat would develop a slime, a coating of bacterial growth that was somehow both slimy and crusty. It would smell like death. Not metaphorical death, actual death. The smell of decomposition with a salty twist. Regulation said spoiled meat should be thrown overboard. Reality said food was food. You'd scrape off the worst of the slime, rinse the meat in seawater, boil it for hours. Hope the cooking killed whatever was growing on it. Eat it anyway because the alternative was starving. There is a famous account from a British naval surgeon in 1740 who examined the salt beef on his ship and described it as so hard that it could barely be broken with a hammer, and so rotten that it stank like a corpse. The ship's crew ate it anyway, all of it. Over 6 months, 100 men eating corpse, flavoured, hammer-resistant salt beef. They survived. Barely. The salt pork was generally considered better than the salt beef, not because it tasted better. It didn't. But pork fat survived the salting process better than beef fat did. This meant salt pork was slightly less dry. Still terrible, just slightly less terrible. In the hierarchy of awful preserved meats, salt pork was king. This tells you everything about the other options. Your daily ration of meat was typically half a pound of salt pork, or 1 pound of salt beef. You got pork 4 days a week, beef 2 days a week, and no meat on Fridays because the Navy had some kind of religious objection to feeding you meat on Fridays, but was totally fine with feeding you rotting protein the other 6 days. The logic is flawless. This meat was usually boiled in a large pot with water, creating a soup or stew. Into this pot also went your hardtack pieces, some dried peas if you were lucky, and maybe some onions if the ship still had any. The result was called lobscouse, or sea pie, or, more accurately, that thing we eat because we have to. The soup would be grey, murky. A thin layer of fat would float on top, congealing into white islands as it cooled. The meat would be in stringy chunks, impossible to identify as pork or beef without asking. The hardtack pieces would be soggy, disintegrating into pasty lumps. The whole thing would taste primarily of salt, with undertones of decay and top notes of regret. You'd eat this out of a wooden bowl that hadn't been properly cleaned in weeks, with a spoon that dozens of other sailors had used, sitting on a deck that was wet with seawater and probably some other fluids you didn't want to think about. This was dinner. This was every dinner. But we're not done with the horrors yet. Let's talk about what you drank. Water on a long voyage was stored in wooden barrels, large casks, sealed as well as 18th century cooperage would allow, which is to say not very well. The water was loaded at the beginning of the voyage. Months' worth of water, sitting in wooden barrels, in the hold of a ship where it was dark and warm and humid. The water went bad, not immediately but inevitably. Within weeks it started to change. First it would take on a wooden taste, not unpleasant, just woody. You could deal with that. Then it would develop a smell, musty, stale, like old cellar mixed with wet wood, still drinkable if you didn't think about it too hard. Then the algae would start growing. The water would turn slightly green, then very green, then chunky. You'd pour yourself a cup of water and it would be more algae than water. Thick, slimy. You'd have to drink it through your teeth, using them as a filter to catch the larger chunks of plant matter. But wait, it gets worse. The water also developed residents. Larvae, mosquito larvae. If mosquitoes had gotten into the barrels before they were sealed. Other insect larvae that found their way in through imperfect seals. These would swim around in your drinking water. Little wriggling things. You'd see them in your cup, moving, very much alive. The official solution was to drink the water in the dark. What you can't see can't disturb you. Just tilt the cup back and swallow. Don't think about the texture. Don't think about the chunks. Don't think about the fact that you just swallowed something that was swimming a moment ago. Just drink. You need water. This is water. Drink. Some sailors would strain their water through a cloth, This caught the larger chunks, made it slightly less terrible. The cloth would turn green from the algae. You'd rinse it in seawater. Use it again. The cloth itself would start to rot after a few weeks. You'd get a new piece of cloth. Continue drinking. Continue surviving. The really bad water, the water that had been stored for months and had gone truly foul, had a special quality. It would glow. Bioluminescent bacteria would grow in it, and at night, in the dark, your water would emit a faint greenish light. Sailors called it glowing water or sea light. It was actually quite pretty. Also a sign that the water was so contaminated, it was essentially a bacterial culture. You drank it anyway. Thirst beats aesthetics. When the water got too bad to drink even for sailors, there was an alternative: beer. Ships carried beer, lots of beer. Not because sailors were alcoholics, though many were, but because beer stayed drinkable longer than water. The alcohol content, low as it was, inhibited bacterial growth. Beer would stay relatively safe for weeks, even months, while water would go bad in days. The beer wasn't good beer. It was weak, watery stuff, maybe 2 to 3% alcohol. Just enough to kill some bacteria, not enough to get you drunk, unless you drank gallons of it, which some sailors did. The taste was described as sour, musty, vaguely beer-like, and better than the water. But beer took up space, weight, resources. Most ships could only carry enough beer for the first few weeks of a voyage. After that, it was back to the green, chunky, glowing water. Hope you are thirsty. Your daily water ration was typically 1 gallon. That sounds like a lot. It is not. You are doing physical labor in the sun, in the heat, hauling ropes, climbing rigging, sweating constantly. 1 gallon of water is barely enough to keep you hydrated, and half of it is algae. Do the math on how hydrated you actually are. Dehydration was constant, chronic. Every sailor was perpetually slightly dehydrated. Your lips would crack, your skin would dry out, your urine would be dark, concentrated. You'd have headaches, dizziness. But these were just background conditions, normal parts of being at sea. You didn't complain about them any more than you'd complain about the sun rising. Now let's talk about the dried peas, because every meal needed a vegetable component, and dried peas were it. They were cheap. They lasted forever. They were nutritious. In theory, in practice, they were another vector for insect infestation. The peas came dried and stored in sacks, large burlap sacks, kept in the hold, where they would absorb moisture from the air. Swell slightly, create the perfect environment for pea weevils, little beetles that loved dried legumes. They burrow into the peas, lay eggs, the eggs would hatch. The larvae would eat the pea from the inside out. You'd have hollow peas, filled with larvae and frass. Frass is the polite word for insect poop. Your peas were full of it. When you cooked the peas, the weevils would float to the top, dead, boiled, creating a protein, rich foam. You'd skim this off, or you wouldn't. Extra protein. The peas themselves would be mushy from being dried, and then rehydrated. The texture was grainy, pasty. The taste was vaguely pea-like, if peas had no flavour and a slight aftertaste of storage sack. The peas went into the same pot as everything else, boiled with the salt meat, mixed with the hardtack pieces, creating a stew that was grey, chunky, and composed entirely of foods that had been dead for months. This was called peas pudding, or peas pottage, and it was served multiple times per week. Sometimes the peas were so old, so dried out, that they wouldn't soften no matter how long you boiled them. You'd have rock-hard peas in your stew, little green bullets. You'd bite down on one and nearly break a tooth again, because apparently every component of maritime food was specifically designed to destroy your dental health. Occasionally, ships would carry dried beans instead of peas. Same concept, same problems, same weevils, different legume. The beans had the added bonus of being even harder than peas. Boiling them required hours, sometimes overnight. You'd put them in a pot before you went to sleep, keep the fire going, and hope they were edible by morning. Sometimes they were. Sometimes you just ate hard beans and accepted that this was your life now. Let's discuss cheese. Ships carried cheese because it was calorie dense, didn't require cooking, and could last for months without refrigeration. In theory. In practice, ship's cheese was an adventure. The cheese was usually a hard cheese, cheddar, type, made specifically for naval use, which meant it was made as cheaply as possible with maximum salt and minimum quality. It started out hard enough that you couldn't bite through it. You had to cut it with a knife, and even then, the knife would slip because the cheese was so dense. The color was yellowish, brown, not the healthy yellow of fresh cheddar, a sad, aged yellow that bordered on brown. The smell was intense, sharp, ammoniac, the kind of smell that makes your eyes water. This was normal. Good cheese, they said, aged properly. It is supposed to smell like that, probably. The texture was crumbly and greasy simultaneously. It would crumble when you cut it, leaving bits everywhere. But it was also oily, leaving a film on your hands and mouth. The taste was overwhelmingly salty and sour, with a sharpness that attacked your tongue. You'd eat a small piece, and your whole mouth would pucker. But here is the thing about ship's cheese: it moved. The cheese would be full of mites, cheese mites, tiny creatures, barely visible, that lived in aged cheese. Thousands of them, millions. The cheese would be more mite than dairy. If you looked closely, you could see the surface rippling slightly. Movement, life. Your cheese was alive. Sailors had a technique for dealing with this. You'd cut a slice of cheese, hold it up to a candle flame. The heat would make the mites crawl to the surface to escape. You'd see them emerging, little specks moving. You'd scrape them off, then you'd eat the cheese. This was normal. This was every day. The cheese that had been stored for many months would develop a crust. A hard black crust on the outside, covering what was presumably still cheese on the inside. The crust was composed of mold, dirt, and dead mites compacted together. You'd cut this off. Underneath, the cheese would be even more crumbly, even more alive with mites. You'd eat it. Of course you'd eat it. Food was food. There is a wonderful account from 1757 of a sailor describing the ship's cheese as so infested with mites that it appeared to move across the table of its own accord. He ate it. They all ate it. The alternative was no cheese, and cheese, even living cheese, provided calories and some small amount of enjoyment in an otherwise joyless existence. The really old cheese, the cheese that had been in storage for over a year, would develop a special quality. It would become translucent. The fat would separate, creating pockets of oil within the cheese. These pockets would go rancid. Cutting into old cheese was like opening a tiny pocket of rotten butter. The smell would hit you. Sour, rancid, overwhelming. You'd cut around it, use the less rotten parts, waste nothing. Your cheese ration was typically 2 ounces, per Dalton Y on days when you didn't get meat. 2 ounces of hard, salty, mite-infested cheese. You'd gnaw on it throughout the day. Let pieces soften in your mouth. Swallow the mites along with the dairy. Feel grateful for the calories. This was lunch. This was dinner. This was fine. Now we need to talk about the rats, because every ship had rats, hundreds of them, maybe thousands on larger vessels. They lived in the hold, in the cargo. In the walls, they ate the food supplies. They multiplied. They thrived. And eventually, sailors ate them. Rat catching was both sport and supplement. You'd set traps. Primitive wooden traps, basically boxes that fell on the rat when it went for the bait. You'd catch a rat, kill it, skin it, cook it. The meat was dark, gamey, but it was fresh. Fresher than anything else on the ship. Fresher than the salt pork that had been in a barrel for 8 months. Fresher than the hardtack from 1695. Rat tasted like dark chicken, sailors said, or like rabbit. It was stringy, tough, but it was protein that hadn't been salted to death. That was something. Rat stew became a delicacy, not because it was good, because it was different, because it was fresh, because it was one of the few things on board that hadn't been deliberately preserved into inedibility. Some ships had so many rats that hunting them became a regular activity. Sailors would compete to see who could catch the most. The winners would get extra rations or a tot of rum. The rats would be cooked in the same pot as everything else, boiled with the peas and hardtack. Rat pottage. It was exactly as appetizing as it sounds, which is to say, by month 4 of the voyage, it sounded pretty good. The rats also contaminated everything. They'd get into the food barrels, gnaw through the wood, eat the hardtack, leave droppings everywhere. You'd reach into a barrel of ship's biscuit and pull out hardtack that had visible rat tooth marks, rat urine, rat droppings. You'd brush it off, eat it anyway. The alternative was going hungry, and hunger was worse than rat contamination. There are documented cases of ships running so low on food that rat hunting became the primary source of meat. The salt pork was gone, the beef was gone, but the rats were plentiful. The crew would organize rat hunts, kill dozens, skin them, cook them, survive on them. Rats saved lives. Weird, disgusting lives. But lives, nonetheless. The ship's cat was supposed to control the rat population. Every ship had a cat, sometimes several. They were official crew members, fed from the common stores, valued members of the team. But one cat versus 1,000 rats is not a fair fight. The cat did its best. The rats still thrived. Eventually, when food got really scarce, someone would look at the cat and think thoughts. Dark thoughts. Hungry thoughts. The cat was, after all, meat. But beyond the rats, there were other uninvited protein sources. Cockroaches. Enormous cockroaches that infested the ship. They were everywhere. In the food. In the bedding. In your hair while you slept. You'd wake up with cockroaches on your face. This was normal. You'd brush them off. Go about your day. Some sailors ate them, roasted. They tasted like whatever they'd been eating, which was your food supplies, so it was kind of recycling. Gross recycling. But recycling nonetheless. The worst part about ship food wasn't any single component. It was the cumulative effect. Month after month of the same terrible foods. Hardtack. Salt meat. Peas. Cheese. Repeat. Your body would start to rebel. First, you'd develop digestive issues, constant indigestion. The heavy salt content, the lack of fibre, the preserved meat that was barely digestible. Your stomach would hurt. Always a dull ache that became background noise. You'd be constipated for days, then have explosive diarrhea, then constipated again. There was no regularity, no normal. Just a cycle of digestive distress. Then the malnutrition would set in. You were eating calories, lots of salt, some protein. But you weren't getting vitamins. Fresh fruits and vegetables lasted maybe 2 weeks into a voyage. After that, nothing fresh, nothing green, nothing that contained vitamin C, and without vitamin C, you got scurvy. Scurvy was the sailor's plague, the disease that killed more sailors than storms, battles, and accidents combined. It started slow. You'd feel tired, more tired than usual. Your old wounds would reopen. Scars from injuries that had healed years ago would split open, start bleeding. This was your body breaking down. Literally. The connective tissue dissolving. Your gums would swell, turn purple, bleed at the slightest touch. Your teeth would loosen. You could wiggle them with your tongue, push them back and forth. Eventually they'd fall out. Not all at once, one by one. Over weeks you'd lose teeth to scurvy faster than you'd lost them to hardtack. That is saying something. Bruises would appear. Spontaneous bruises. You hadn't been hit, hadn't bumped into anything, but your skin would turn purple. Black, blue. Your legs would be covered in bruises. Your arms, your chest. Internal bleeding. Your blood vessels were failing, breaking down, leaking blood into your tissues. The pain came next. Joint pain. Deep, aching pain in your knees. Your elbows, your hips. Moving hurt. Standing hurt. Lying down hurt. Everything hurt. The pain was constant. Overwhelming. You'd cry out in your sleep. Wake up moaning. This was advanced scurvy. This was what happened when you'd gone months without vitamin C. Then the madness would start. Scurvy affected the brain. You'd become depressed, lethargic, unable to think clearly. Some sailors would develop hallucinations, see things that weren't there, smell foods that didn't exist, have conversations with people who weren't present. The ship surgeon could do nothing. There was no cure, no treatment. You either got fresh food or you died. Those were the options. Ships carried limes, or lemons, eventually, after the British Navy figured out that citrus prevented scurvy. But this knowledge came late, and even when they knew, the supply was never enough. A few limes per sailor per week. Not enough. Not nearly enough to prevent scurvy completely, just enough to delay it, push it back. Give you a few more months before your teeth fell out. The sailors who died of scurvy died slowly, painfully. Over weeks they'd waste away, their bodies consuming themselves. Too weak to work, too sick to eat, they'd lie in their hammocks, bleeding from their gums, covered in bruises, moaning in pain. And there was nothing anyone could do. Just wait, hope land came soon. Hope there would be fresh food. Hope they survived long enough to eat it. The survivors, the ones who made it to port, would stagger off the ship, barely able to walk. They'd eat fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, anything green. Their bodies would absorb the vitamin C, like drowning men, gasping for air. Within days, the symptoms would start to reverse. The bleeding would stop. The pain would lessen. The bruises would fade. It was miraculous, except it wasn't a miracle. It was just nutrition. Basic, minimal nutrition. And they'd been deprived of it for months. Let's talk about the cooking arrangements, because the food was bad enough. The conditions in which it was prepared made everything worse. The ship's galley was a small area, usually in the forward part of the ship, below deck. No ventilation, no windows. Just a brick or iron stove called a galley stove, and enough room for one person to work. That person was the ship's cook, and the ship's cook was usually someone who couldn't do any other job. See, being a sailor required certain physical capabilities. You climbed rigging, you hauled heavy ropes, you worked in all weather. If you couldn't do these things, you were useless. Unless you could cook, then you became the cook. Not because you had culinary skills, but because you were the least useful person for actual sailing. The cook was often someone who'd been injured, lost a leg, lost an arm, lost an eye, too old to climb rigging, too weak to haul ropes. These were your cooks, disabled men cooking food for able-bodied sailors using one arm or one leg in a tiny, hot, smoke-filled space, with ingredients that were barely edible to begin with. The cooking equipment was minimal. One large pot, maybe two, a few wooden spoons, a knife. That was it. Everything was cooked in the same pot. The pot was rarely cleaned, not properly cleaned. You dump out the previous meal's remains. Rinse the pot with seawater. Maybe then start cooking the next meal. The pot would develop a coating, layers of residue from hundreds of meals. This coating was considered seasoning. It added flavor, they said. It added bacteria and mold, reality said. But nobody asked reality. The fire in the galley stove was supposed to be carefully maintained. In practice, it was a hazard. Fire on a wooden ship is bad. Fire below deck on a wooden ship is catastrophic. But you needed fire to cook, so you had fire, and you hoped it stayed contained. Sometimes it didn't. Ships burned. Entire ships destroyed because the galley fire got out of control. The cook would be blamed if he survived. If he didn't survive, well, no one to blame. Just another hazard of maritime life. The smoke from the fire had nowhere to go. There was supposed to be a vent, a pipe leading up through the decks to the open air. But the vent was small, inadequate. The smoke would fill the galley, pour into the surrounding areas. The cook worked in constant smoke, breathed smoke all day. His lungs were black. His eyes watered constantly. He'd cough. That deep, hacking cough of someone whose respiratory system has given up. This was normal. This was the job. The food that came out of this galley was as contaminated as you'd expect. Cooked in unwashed pots, prepared by smoke, damaged hands, served in conditions that would horrify any health inspector. But there were no health inspectors. There were no regulations. There was just food, such as it was, and sailors who were hungry enough to eat it. The cook had immense power. He controlled the food. He decided portion sizes. He could give extra to his friends, withhold from his enemies. This made him important, respected even. You didn't antagonize the cook. You were polite to the cook, because the cook could make your life even more miserable than it already was. And it was already very miserable. Sometimes the cook would steal food, skim a bit off each ration, accumulate extra for himself, sell it to sailors who were still hungry after their official ration. This was technically illegal, practically universal. The cook supplemented his income by selling back to the crew the food that was supposed to be theirs already. Nobody reported it, because you might need to buy extra rations yourself someday, and you didn't want the cook to remember you as the snitch. The meals were served at specific times. Breakfast, dinner, no lunch. 2 meals per Dalton Yoi. You'd line up with your bowl, the cook would ladle out your portion. You'd look at it, grey stew, chunks of unidentifiable meat, soggy hardtack pieces, a thin layer of fat on top. This was dinner. This was what you'd been waiting for all day. You'd take your bowl, find a spot to sit, eat. Try not to think about what you were eating. Fail at not thinking about it. Eat anyway. The eating area was wherever you could find space. Usually on deck. You'd sit on coils of rope, on barrels. On the deck itself. There were no tables, no chairs. You ate with your hands or with a spoon you'd carved yourself. The bowl would be wooden, stained, cracked, shared among several sailors. You'd eat. Pass the bowl to the next person. They'd eat. The spoon would be shared too, passed around. Nobody's mouth was clean. Nobody's mouth was healthy. You shared diseases along with the bowl. If it was raining, you ate in the rain. water diluting your stew. If it was hot, you ate in the heat, sweating into your food. If it was cold, you ate in the cold. Your food cooling faster than you could eat it. There was no comfortable eating scenario, just variations of uncomfortable, and the quantities were never enough. Your official ration was calculated to keep you alive. Not comfortable, not satisfied, just alive. You'd finish your portion and still be hungry, always still hungry. Hunger was the baseline state. You were never full, never satisfied, just less hungry than you had been before eating. Some sailors would save food, hoard a bit of hardtack, a piece of cheese, hide it away for later. This was risky. Stored food attracted rats, attracted theft. But the temptation to have something extra, something to look forward to, was strong. You'd hide your precious bit of mouldy cheese in your sea chest. Hope nobody found it. Hope the rats didn't find it. Retrieve it days later. Find it even mouldier, even more alive with mites. Eat it anyway. It was yours. You'd saved it. It was special. The inequality of rations was another source of misery. The officers ate better than the common sailors. Not luxuriously better, but noticeably better. They got the less rotten meat, the less weevily hardtack. They had their own supplies of delicacies, jam, honey, actual butter. These things existed on the ship, just not for you. You were a common sailor. You got common food, which is to say, terrible food. The captain ate best of all. He brought his own supplies, personal stores of wine, preserved fruits. Cheese that wasn't moving. He dined in his cabin, alone or with the senior officers. While you sat on the deck eating weevil, infested hardtack and rat-contaminated stew, this wasn't resentment, just reality. The hierarchy extended to food. Everything was hierarchical. Food was no exception. Sometimes, very rarely, there would be a special occasion, a holiday, Christmas, the captain's birthday, someone's promotion. On these occasions there might be extra rations, a tot of rum for everyone, maybe a piece of salt pork that was slightly larger than usual. This was celebration. This was luxury, an extra ounce of rotten meat and a shot of rum. You'd feel grateful, feel special, feel like this voyage might not be completely terrible. Then the next day you'd be back to regular rations, regular misery. The rum is worth discussing. Ships carried rum, or gin, or whatever alcohol was cheap and available. Not for enjoyment, for sanitation. The water was so bad that mixing it with alcohol made it safer. The alcohol killed some bacteria, made the water less likely to make you sick. This mixture was called grog. Water and rum mixed together, usually 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part rum. Just enough alcohol to sanitize, not enough to get drunk. Your daily rum ration was sacred, inviolable. No matter how bad things got, you got your rum. It was distributed at specific times. Noon, usually the whole crew would gather. The rum would be measured out carefully, everyone watching, making sure nobody got more, making sure nobody got less. Perfect equality in rum distribution. Even if everything else was unequal, the rum was fair. You'd drink your grog, feel the warmth spread through your chest, feel a tiny bit of relaxation, a tiny bit of escape from the constant misery. This was the high point of your day. A few ounces of watered down rum. This was happiness, or as close to happiness as you'd get at sea. Some sailors would save their rum, accumulate it, get drunk on their day off, if they had a day off. This was dangerous. Drunk sailors fell overboard, fell from rigging, made stupid decisions. But the temporary escape from reality was worth the risk. You'd get drunk, forget about the food, forget about the scurvy, forget about the fact that you'd been eating weevil-infested hardtack for 4 months straight. Wake up hungover, remember everything, regret the hangover, not regret the drinking. Let's talk about fishing, because ships travelled on the ocean. The ocean had fish. Surely sailors ate fish. Sometimes, rarely, not as often as you'd think. Fishing from a moving ship was difficult. You are travelling. The fish are not travelling with you. You'd troll a line behind the ship. Hope something bit. Sometimes something did. A fish. You'd haul it up. It would be fresh. Actually fresh. This was miraculous. Fresh protein. Not salted. Not preserved. Not full of weevils. Just fish. The fish would be cooked immediately, shared among the crew. Everyone got a tiny piece, a few ounces, but it was fresh. It tasted like food, real food. Food that hadn't been dead for months. The taste was indescribable, not because it was especially delicious, but because it was different. Your taste buds had forgotten that food could taste like something other than salt and rot. Sometimes the ship would stop at an island, a coast, somewhere with people, trade opportunities. You'd go ashore, buy fresh food, fruit, vegetables, meat that was recently alive. You'd eat like you'd never eaten before. Gorge yourself. Your stomach, shrunken from months of inadequate rations, would rebel. You'd eat too much, too fast, be sick. Vomit it all up. Eat more, be sick again. This cycle would continue until either the food ran out or your stomach adapted. The fresh food wouldn't last. 2 weeks, maybe. Then it would be gone. Eaten, rotted, moulded. Back to hardtack. Back to salt meat. Back to the regular menu of misery. But those 2 weeks would sustain you mentally. Give you something to remember. Something to look forward to. The next port. The next fresh meal. This hope kept you going. Through months of terrible food. Through scurvy. Through pain. The hope of eventually eating something that didn't try to crawl away first. There were other occasional treats. If the ship took a prize, captured an enemy vessel, you'd raid their food stores. Maybe they had better supplies. Less weevilly hardtack. Less rotten meat. Maybe they had luxuries. Coffee. Sugar. These would be distributed among the crew. Or sold. Or kept by the officers, mostly kept by the officers. But sometimes you'd get a tiny bit of sugar. A few ounces. You'd make it last. A tiny spoonful at a time. Added to your terrible coffee. Making it slightly less terrible. This was wealth. This was luxury. The psychological impact of the food was as damaging as the physical impact. Eating terrible food. Every day. For months. Wears on your mind. You'd dream about food. Real food. Fresh bread. Fruit. Vegetables. Meat that tasted like meat. You'd wake up from these dreams. Remember where you were. What you'd actually be eating today. The disappointment was crushing. Some sailors would talk about food, obsessively. Describe meals they'd had on land. Meals their mothers made. Meals from taverns. Elaborate, detailed descriptions. This was torture. Sweet torture. You'd listen. Salivate. Imagine. Then eat your hardtack and hate your life a little more. Others refused to talk about food at all. Wouldn't discuss it, wouldn't think about it. Eating was just fuel. Just something you did to survive. Thinking about it made it worse. Better to eat mechanically. Without thought, without hope. Just consume, survive, repeat. The impact on your health was catastrophic. Malnutrition. Scurvy. Digestive issues. Tooth loss. Weakened immune system. You'd get sick constantly. Colds, infections. Diseases. Your body depleted of nutrients. Couldn't fight off anything. A minor cut would get infected. The infection would spread. You'd develop a fever. Maybe survive. Maybe not. Luck of the draw. Your physical appearance would change. You'd lose weight. Muscle mass. Your face would become gaunt. Sunken cheeks. Hollow eyes. Your skin would take on an unhealthy pallor. Greyish. Yellowish. Your hair would thin. Fall out. Your fingernails would become brittle. Break easily. You'd look like a corpse. A walking corpse. But you'd walk. You'd work. Because the alternative was being thrown overboard as dead weight. The fatigue was constant, overwhelming. You were tired all the time. Not just sleepy, exhausted. Bone-deep exhaustion. Your body running on fumes. On inadequate calories. On no vitamins. On contaminated water. But you worked anyway. Climbed rigging anyway. Hauled ropes anyway. Because if you didn't work, you didn't eat. And as terrible as the food was, not eating was worse. Let's talk about the really desperate times. When food ran out, this happened. More often than official records would suggest. Voyages that took longer than expected. Supplies that ran out faster than planned. Storms that blew you off course. Suddenly your 6-month supply of food had to last 8 months, 9 months, a year. The rations would be cut, first by a little, then by more, then drastically. Your pound of hardtack per Dalton Y would become half a pound, then a quarter pound. You'd be allocated 2 pieces of rock, hard biscuit, per Dalton Y. That is it, your entire food intake. 2 pieces of hardtack, maybe a small piece of salt meat, if there was any left. The hunger would become all-consuming. You'd think about nothing else, dream about nothing else. Every waking moment dominated by hunger. Your stomach would ache, cramp, twist. Your body literally consuming itself. Muscle mass disappearing. Fat, what little you had, completely gone. your body cannibalizing its own tissue to keep you alive. Sailors would eat things that weren't food: leather, belts, shoes, anything made of leather. You'd cut it into small pieces, boil it for hours, until it was soft enough to chew. It had no nutritional value, but it filled your stomach, gave the illusion of eating, the illusion of satisfaction. It wasn't satisfaction, but it was something. The ship's cat, if it had survived this long, wouldn't survive much longer. Someone would kill it, eat it. This wasn't cruelty. This was desperation. The cat was meat. Meat was survival. The hierarchy of needs had collapsed to a single need: calories. Where those calories came from didn't matter. The rats, usually pests, became valuable, hunted aggressively, fought over. A rat represented food. Real food, more nutritious than leather, more substantial than hope. The rats would start to wise up, get harder to catch. They'd retreat to places humans couldn't reach. The hunt would become more difficult, more desperate. There are historical accounts of ships where the crew resorted to cannibalism, dead sailors being consumed by living sailors. This wasn't common, but it happened. Enough times to be documented, enough times to be real. When you are starving to death, when everyone around you is starving to death, when someone dies, you face a choice: die with them, or eat them and survive a bit longer. This is the furthest extreme, the worst case. Most ships didn't get this bad. Most ships made it to port before complete starvation. But the fact that it could get this bad, that it sometimes did get this bad, tells you everything about maritime food supplies. They were inadequate, insufficient, designed to keep you barely alive. And sometimes they couldn't even do that. But let's return to the normal level of terrible, the everyday misery that was standard on long voyages. The boredom of eating the same foods every single day. Hardtack for breakfast, hardtack and salt meat for dinner, peas, cheese. Repeat. No variety, no surprises. You knew exactly what you'd be eating for the next 6 months. The same things you ate the last 6 months. The same things you'd eat for the rest of your career. This monotony was its own form of torture. Your taste buds would become desensitized. Everything tasted like salt, like nothing. Like cardboard, your sense of smell would adapt. The terrible smells became normal. You'd stop noticing the rot, the decay, the wrongness of food that had been preserved beyond any reasonable limit. Your expectations would lower dramatically. Food that would have made you gag on land became acceptable at sea. Normal even. You'd eat things without complaint that would have horrified your former self. The person you were before you went to sea wouldn't recognize the person you became. The person who ate maggot, filled hardtack and called it a meal. And yet, sailors survived this. Generations of them. Centuries of men eating this terrible food, living on it, working on it, some for years, decades. Career sailors who spent their entire adult lives eating hardtack and salt pork. They survived. Their bodies adapted. Their minds adapted. They developed strategies, coping mechanisms, dark humor about their food, jokes about the weevils, songs about the salt meat, laughter as defense against despair. The camaraderie helped. Everyone was suffering together. Nobody was eating better. Well, the officers were, but among the common sailors, everyone had the same terrible food. This created solidarity, shared misery. You'd complain together, joke together, suffer together, and somehow this made it bearable. Not good, never good, but bearable. There were small victories. A piece of hardtack that wasn't too hard. A chunk of salt pork that was less salty than usual. These tiny improvements would brighten your day. You'd share the news. This pork isn't completely terrible. Everyone would gather around. Examine it, agree or disagree. Debate the relative quality of terrible food. This was entertainment. This was socialization. This was life. The end of the voyage was always the goal. The light at the end of the tunnel. Land. Fresh food. Real food. You'd see the coastline. Know that in days, maybe hours, you'd be eating fruit. Vegetables, fresh bread. The anticipation was almost as good as the actual food. Almost. When you finally made port, when you finally stepped off that ship, when you finally ate fresh food again, the relief was indescribable. Not just physical, emotional, spiritual, even. You'd survived. You'd eaten months of terrible food and survived. Your teeth were gone, your gums were bleeding, your stomach was destroyed, but you'd survived. And then, after a few weeks on land, after your body recovered, after your scurvy symptoms faded, you'd sign up for another voyage. Because this was your job. This was your life. and the cycle would begin again. More hardtack, more salt meat, more weevils, more rats, more survival. This was maritime food. This was what sailors ate, not just in one era, but across centuries. From the 1500s through the 1800s, 300 years of men eating the same terrible foods. 300 years of hardtack and salt pork. 300 years of malnutrition and scurvy. 300 years of survival against the odds. The food didn't improve significantly until the late 1800s, until canning was invented, until refrigeration became possible, until someone finally realized that maybe, just maybe, feeding sailors food that was actively rotting was a bad idea. Until then, this was normal. This was expected. This was what you signed up for when you went to sea. And millions of men did it, lived on this food, worked on this food, built empires on this food, discovered new lands while eating weevil-infested hardtack, fought wars while suffering from scurvy, changed the course of history while their teeth fell out from malnutrition. The resilience is staggering. The ability to endure this level of dietary misery is almost incomprehensible from our modern perspective. We complain if our coffee isn't exactly right. They ate maggots and called it Tuesday. We send food back if it is not cooked perfectly. They ate food that was perfectly rotten and thank the cook. Perspective. That is what this gives us. When you are tempted to complain about your meal, when your restaurant order is slightly wrong, when your food isn't exactly what you wanted, remember the sailors, remember the hardtack, remember the weevils, remember the scurvy, remember the men who ate food that would make modern health inspectors weep and call for immediate evacuation. Your worst meal is their average day. Your complaints are their luxuries. You have access to fresh food. They dreamed of fresh food. You have variety. They had hardtack. You have nutrition. They had scurvy. You have refrigeration. They had rot. So maybe appreciate that sandwich, that fruit, that vegetable, that meal that isn't actively trying to give you scurvy. Appreciate the fact that your bread doesn't contain insects. Your meat isn't green. Your water doesn't glow in the dark. Appreciate the miracles of modern food storage, modern nutrition, modern everything that keeps you from having to eat, like a sailor on a long voyage. Because you wouldn't survive it. None of us would. Not just the food, but the months of eating that food. The constant malnutrition, the scurvy, the hunger, the desperation. We're too soft, too accustomed to food that tastes good, too dependent on variety and nutrition. They were harder, tougher, more resilient, they had to be, because the alternative was death, and they chose survival, chose to eat the terrible food, chose to endure, chose to live, and that is remarkable. So the next time you are grocery shopping, selecting from aisles of fresh food, consider the sailor, consider his hardtack, his salt pork, his weevils, his scurvy, and maybe feel a little grateful, maybe waste a little less, maybe complain a little less, because compared to maritime rations, you are living in paradise. We all are, and we should remember that. Honor the sailors who ate terrible food so that eventually, centuries later, we wouldn't have to. Remember their sacrifice, their suffering, their incredible, stubborn, admirable survival. Maritime food was terrible. Sailors were extraordinary. That is the story. That is the truth. That is what you need to know about what sailors actually ate on long voyages. It wasn't good. It wasn't close to good. It was survival. And somehow, impossibly, they survived. And that is remarkable. But we need to go deeper into the specific horrors, because the general overview doesn't capture the day-to-day reality of eating this food. Let's walk through a typical day, a specific detailed day, your day, as a sailor, eating sailor food. You wake up in your hammock. It is 4 a.m. You've been asleep for maybe 4 hours. The bell rings. Time to work. Your first thought isn't about work. It is about food. Specifically about how hungry you are. You went to bed hungry last night. You woke up hungry this morning. Hunger is your constant companion. Has been for 3 months. Will be for 3 more. You swing out of your hammock. Your feet hit the deck. The deck is wet. Always wet. Seawater. Condensation. Other fluids you don't investigate. You are barefoot. Your shoes, if you own shoes, are too precious to wear casually. You save them for shore leave. For special occasions. Your feet have adapted. Thick calluses. Hard as leather, you can walk on splinters without feeling them. This is progress. Painful progress. You make your way to the galley area. Breakfast is being prepared. Prepared is a generous word, heated. Breakfast is being heated. It is the same as yesterday, the same as the day before, the same as it will be tomorrow. You know this. Everyone knows this. But you line up anyway, because food is food, even terrible food. The cook is already awake, has been for an hour. He is one-legged, lost the other leg in a battle 15 years ago. Couldn't climb rigging anymore, became the cook. He is stirring a pot. A large iron pot, black with accumulated residue from thousands of previous meals. The pot has never been truly clean, will never be truly clean. Cleaning would require fresh water. Fresh water is for drinking, not cleaning. The pot is rinsed with seawater sometimes. If the cook feels motivated, the smell hits you, not a good smell, not a food smell, a hot smell. Something being heated, the contents of the pot are burgoo. That is the official name. Sailors call it different names. Most of them unprintable. It is hardtack soaked overnight in water, then boiled. The result is a paste. A grey, lumpy paste. It has the consistency of wallpaper paste. The taste of sadness. You hold out your bowl, the cook ladles a portion into it. The burgoo makes a wet slapping sound as it hits the wood. You look down at your breakfast. It is grey. It is steaming slightly. It has lumps. The lumps are unidentified. Could be hardtack pieces that didn't fully dissolve. Could be weevil clusters. Could be something else. You don't investigate. Investigation leads to knowledge. Knowledge leads to not eating. Not eating leads to starvation. You find a spot on deck. Sit down, the sun isn't up yet. It is dark, cold. The burgoo is hot. This is its only virtue. You bring a spoonful to your mouth. The texture is wrong, gummy. It sticks to your spoon, sticks to your teeth, sticks to the roof of your mouth. You chew, even though it is paste. You chew because chewing is what you do with food. Even when the food doesn't require chewing, the taste is. There is no taste. It is bland, completely bland, like eating paste made from nothing. There is a slight aftertaste, slightly musty. Slightly off, you swallow. Take another spoonful, repeat. This is breakfast. This is every breakfast. You finish the bowl. You are still hungry. You are always still hungry. But the bowl is empty. That is all you get. You scrape the last bits out with your finger. Lick the bowl. Waste nothing. You've learned to waste nothing. Work begins. You are assigned to the morning watch. 4 hours of work. Hauling ropes. Adjusting sails. Following orders shouted by the bosun. The work is hard. Physical. You are doing it on one bowl of burgoo. One bowl of paste. Your stomach growls. Your muscles protest. You work anyway, because that is what you do. That is what everyone does. By 8 in the morning, you are exhausted. Sweating. Thirsty. Hungry. So hungry. Your shift ends. You have 4 hours until the midday meal. 4 hours to rest. To sleep. To sit. You find your hammock, climb in, try to sleep. Can't. Too hungry. Hunger keeps you awake. You lie there, in your hammock, stomach cramping, thinking about food. This is rest. This is your break. Noon arrives, the bell rings, mealtime. You are out of your hammock instantly. Everyone is. The line forms quickly. Everyone hungry. Everyone waiting. The cook has prepared the midday meal. Prepared. Heated. Same thing. Today it is salt pork and peas. You can tell by the smell. That particular combination of salt, decay, and legume. The pork has been soaking since yesterday, leaching out salt. It is still incredibly salty. The peas are dried peas, boiled for hours, still not quite soft. The combination creates a stew. Grey, brown, thick, chunky. Your portion is ladled into your bowl. You see chunks of meat floating in grey liquid. The meat is dark. Not the healthy dark of fresh pork, a grey dark, the colour of death. The peas are mushy, but also somehow still firm. They've achieved a texture that is simultaneously too soft and too hard. This is a gift. A talent. Only maritime cooking can create this contradiction. You take your bowl, find your spot. Same spot as breakfast. Everything is ritual, routine. You sit, look at your food. There is a film on top, pork fat that is solidified as the stew cooled. You skim it off with your spoon, or you don't. Some sailors eat the fat. Extra calories, it is rancid, obviously rancid, but calories are calories. You skim it off. You have some standards left, not many. but some. The first bite is pure salt. The pork is so salty it attacks your mouth. Your tongue recoils. Your salivary glands try to defend themselves by producing more saliva. This doesn't help. You are just drowning the salt in spit you swallow. Your throat protests. You are now thirsty, intensely thirsty. You'll need to drink water after this. The terrible, green, chunky water. You are looking forward to it. That is how salty the pork is. The peas are better being relative. They taste like peas, vaguely. If peas had no flavour and a weird texture, you find a piece of pork. It is maybe 2 inches long, 1 inch wide. This represents meat. You put it in your mouth. Chew. The texture is strange, fibrous, stringy. It doesn't break down. You chew for a full minute, the meat just sits there, taunting you. Finally, you swallow it whole. Let your stomach deal with it. Your stomach is not happy about this decision. It will complain later. It always complains later. You eat methodically. Spoon, mouth, swallow, repeat. Don't think. Don't taste. Just consume. This is fuel. This is not food. This is fuel for your body. Your body needs fuel. Therefore you eat. The logic is sound. The experience is terrible. Halfway through your bowl, you bite down on something hard, harder than the peas, harder than the pork. You spit it into your hand. It is a pea, but not a normal pea. A rock-hard pea that didn't soften despite hours of boiling. There are several of these in every batch. You throw it overboard. Continue eating. 2 bites later, another hard pea. Overboard. This is normal. Every meal has obstacles, challenges. You overcome them. You eat. You finish your portion. Lick the bowl again. Stand up. Immediately need water. Your mouth is a salt flat. Desert. Dry. You make your way to the water barrel. The water is green. You can see it even in the dim light below decks. Bright green. Alive with algae. You dip your cup in. The water has chunks. You strain it through your teeth. Swallow. The taste is swampy. Organic. Living. This is water. This is what you drink. You drink 3 cups. Your thirst isn't quenched, just managed. You'll be thirsty again in an hour. You are always thirsty. Back to work, afternoon shift. 4 more hours. Climbing rigging now. High up. The ship is rolling. You are holding on with hands that are cramping from malnutrition. Your muscles are weak, underfed. You hold on anyway, because falling means death. You don't want to die. Not yet. Not today. So you hold on. You climb. You work. The sun is brutal. It is the Caribbean. The sun doesn't shine. It attacks. Your skin is burnt, peeling. Burnt again under the peeling. Layers of burn. Your lips are cracked, bleeding. The salt from your meal has settled into the cracks. Every movement of your mouth is pain. You don't complain. Nobody complains. Complaining is pointless. Everyone is suffering identically. By 4 p.m., you are hallucinating slightly. Not severely. Just little things. The ropes look like snakes. The sails breathe. This is normal. Dehydration. Malnutrition. Sunday exposure. Mix them together and you get mild hallucinations. You ignore them. Focus on the work, the real work. The tangible work. The ropes that are actually ropes. Not snakes. Your shift ends at 6 p.m. Evening meal is at 7 p.m. You have an hour. You spend it lying in your hammock, not sleeping, just existing. Conserving energy. Your body is tired. So tired. You are 26 years old. You feel 50. Your back hurts. Your muscles are sore. This is normal. This is just life. 7 p.m. The bell rings. You are up in line. Again, the cook has made the evening meal. It is the same as the midday meal. Literally the same. It has been sitting in the pot all afternoon. Getting thicker. More concentrated. The fat has re-solidified. The peas have absorbed more liquid. Become mushier. It is the same food. But worse. Somehow cooking it twice makes it worse. You didn't think that was possible. You were wrong. Your portion is smaller. There is less left. The pot is running low. The people at the end of the line will get mostly liquid. Mostly broth. You are in the middle. You get some chunks. Some liquid. A balanced, terrible meal. You eat it. Same routine. Same spot. Same bowl. Same misery. After dinner, you have free time. 3 hours before sleep, you spend it on deck, talking, or not talking. Sitting with other sailors. Everyone is tired. Everyone is hungry. Nobody says it. Everyone knows it. Conversation is sparse. Occasional comments. Observations, jokes. Dark jokes. Jokes about the food, about the cook, about the voyage, about death. Everything is funny when you are this miserable. Nothing is funny. Both things are true. Someone pulls out a piece of hardtack he has been saving, shares it. Everyone takes a tiny piece, gnaws on it. This is generosity. This is community. Sharing terrible food because it is all you have. The hardtack is old. Even by hardtack standards, it has been in his sea chest for 2 weeks. It is extra hard, extra weevily. Nobody complains. You chew your piece. The weevils add texture, protein. You tell yourself this. You almost believe it. Night falls, time for sleep. You climb into your hammock. The hammock smells like you, like sweat, like salt. Like the sea you don't notice anymore. Everyone smells like this. Everything smells like this. You lie down. Your stomach growls. You are hungry, still hungry, always hungry. Tomorrow will be the same meals, the same work, the same hunger. The same hunger. This is day 94 of your voyage. You have 86 days left. You count them. Every day, you know exactly how many meals of hardtack and salt pork stand between you and land, between you and fresh food, between you and salvation. You close your eyes. Try to sleep. Can't too hungry. Your mind drifts to food. Real food. You think about bread. Fresh bread. Warm, soft, with butter. You can almost taste it. Almost. Then you remember where you are, what you are actually eating. The fantasy dies. The hunger remains. You shift position. The hammock sways. Eventually, exhaustion wins. You sleep, fitfully. Dreaming of food, waking up hungry. This is every night. This is maritime life. But let's talk about specific incidents. Because the routine terrible food was bad enough. But sometimes things went spectacularly wrong. Sometimes the food situation went from terrible to catastrophic. These stories were legendary, passed down through generations of sailors, cautionary tales, horror stories, true stories. There is the documented case of MS Guardian in 1789, not the famous mutiny ship, different Guardian. The ship struck an iceberg off South Africa, didn't sink immediately, but was severely damaged, leaking, drifting. The crew worked pumps constantly for weeks, trying to keep the ship afloat. And while they were pumping, while they were fighting for the ship's survival, the food stores were flooding. The seawater got into the hold, into the food barrels. The hardtack absorbed seawater, became soggy, then mouldy. Green mould, black mould, mould growing on mould. The salt meat was already in brine. Adding seawater didn't help, didn't hurt. Just made it saltier. The peas swelled with seawater, burst their skins, became mush. The water casks were contaminated with salt water, undrinkable. The crew was facing starvation and dehydration simultaneously. On a ship surrounded by water, by food. But water they couldn't drink, food they couldn't eat. Some of the hardtack was salvageable. They laid it out on deck, tried to dry it. The sun baked it. Salt crystals formed on the surface. It became harder than before, harder than should be physically possible. They ate it anyway, broke their teeth on salt, crusted hardtack, bled from their gums. 8 more survived. The ship eventually limped to port. Barely half the crew was dead. Not from the iceberg, from starvation, from thirst, from eating contaminated food. The survivors were skeletal, scurvy, ridden, barely human. They'd eaten food that would have killed them slowly on land, eating it while pumping water, while sailing. While starving, they survived, some of them. This was considered a success. Because the ship made it, some of the crew made it. That is a success. In maritime terms, or consider the story of the whale ship Essex, 1820, rammed by a whale, sank. The crew escaped in small boats, 3 boats, 20 men. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from land, they had some provisions, hardtack, water. Not much, not nearly enough. They rationed strictly. A few ounces of hardtack per Dalton Y. A few sips of water. The hardtack ran out in 2 weeks. The water went bad, turned green. Chunky. They drank it anyway. Then it ran out. They had nothing. No food, no water. Surrounded by ocean, they tried to catch fish. Failed mostly. Tried to catch birds. Sometimes succeeded. Ate them raw, feathers and all, blood and organs and bones and feathers. Everything wasted nothing. The men started dying. Dehydration. starvation exposure. When a man died, the survivors faced a choice. Throw the body overboard, or eat it. They ate it. They had to. It was survival. They drew lots for who would be killed and eaten when no one was actively dying. This is documented. This is real. They drew lots. The losers were shot, butchered, eaten. The survivors later wrote about this, described it. The taste, the texture, the guilt, the necessity. They were rescued eventually, months later, 3 survivors, out of 20. They'd eaten their shipmates, drunk their blood, gnawed their bones, and they survived, traumatized, haunted, but alive. This was the extreme, the worst case, but it was real. It happened, and it showed what men would eat when the alternative was death. Back to normal, terrible food. Because after stories like that, regular hardtack and salt pork seems almost palatable. Almost. Let's talk about the cook's power in more detail, because the cook controlled food. Therefore, the cook controlled everything. He was theoretically one of the lowest ranks, disabled, unable to do real sailor work, but in practice, he was one of the most important people on the ship. The cook decided portion sizes. Officially, everyone got equal portions. Unofficially, the cook had discretion. A generous ladle versus a stingy ladle. The difference might be 2 ounces. 2 ounces when you are starving is everything. The cook could give you extra, or give you less, based on whether he liked you, whether you'd been kind to him, whether you'd insulted him last week. Smart sailors were always kind to the cook, helped him when he needed help, brought him things. Shared their rum ration, not from generosity, from strategy. The cook remembered who was kind, who was helpful, and when he was ladling out portions, he remembered. Your kindness was rewarded with an extra ounce of salt pork, an extra spoonful of peas. This could mean the difference between hunger and slightly less hunger, between weakness and slight strength. It mattered. The cook also controlled the quality of food you received. The salt pork barrel had better pieces and worse pieces. The top layer was usually better, less rotten. The bottom layer was the worst, slimy, discolored, actively decomposing. The cook could give you top layer pork or bottom layer pork. If he liked you, top layer. If he didn't, bottom layer, you couldn't complain. You had no proof. It all went in the pot anyway. But you knew, everyone knew. The cook's favoritism was understood, accepted, part of the system. The cook also had access to all the food. He could steal, skim a bit off everyone's rations, accumulate extra for himself, sell it back to desperate sailors. This was illegal. Everyone did it anyway. The officers knew. The captain knew. They ignored it because the cook was essential. A happy cook meant better food preparation, meant less complaints, meant a smoother voyage. Let the cook have his little scams. As long as the crew was fed, as long as nobody starved, it was fine. Some cooks became wealthy, relatively by selling food, by trading rations. They'd finish a voyage with money, real money. While the regular sailors had spent all their pay on rum and shore leave, the cook had saved, invested, became a merchant. This was a path to advancement. From disabled sailor to cook to merchant. It was possible, rare, but possible. But most cooks were just trying to survive, like everyone else. They had a terrible job, working in a hot, smoky, poorly ventilated space, cooking terrible food, knowing everyone hated it, knowing everyone blamed them. Even though the ingredients were terrible, even though they had no control over quality, they got blamed anyway. Bad food. Cook's fault. Never mind that the hardtack was from 1702, and it is now 1756. Cook's fault. The cook dealt with this by developing a thick skin, ignoring complaints, serving the food mechanically, not caring whether people liked it. They wouldn't like it. They couldn't like it. So why care? Just cook, serve. Repeat. Day after day, month after month, voyage after voyage. This was the job. The endless, thankless, essential job. Let's talk about food theft, because when food is scarce, when everyone is hungry, when the difference between your ration and someone else's ration is survival, theft becomes tempting and common and severely punished. The official rations were barely enough. Everyone knew this. Everyone was hungry. But stealing someone else's food meant they went more hungry. This was betrayal. This was the worst offense. Worse than refusing to work. Worse than cowardice in battle. You could be forgiven for those. You wouldn't be forgiven for food theft. The punishment for stealing food was flogging. Public flogging. You'd be tied to the mast, stripped to the waist. The bosun would use a cat o' nine tails, a whip with 9 separate strands. Each strand had knots. The strands would bite into your back, tear the flesh. The knots would catch. Rip! You'd bleed. Everyone would watch. This was the point. Public punishment, public humiliation, public pain, to deter others, to make an example. The usual sentence was 12 lashes, sometimes more. For serious theft, 24, 3 dozen. The bosun would count them out. 1, strike. 2, strike. 3, strike. By the 10th lash, your back would be bleeding freely. By the 20th, the flesh would be ribboned, torn, exposed muscle visible through the tears. By the 30th, you'd be unconscious. They'd throw seawater on you. The salt would wake you up. The pain was indescribable. You'd scream. Everyone screamed. Then it would be over. You'd be cut down, left to recover, or not recover. Infection was common. Death from infected flogging wounds was not rare, but people still stole food because hunger makes you desperate. Stupid, willing to risk anything for a few extra ounces of hardtack. You'd wait until everyone was asleep, sneak to the food stores, take a piece of cheese, a handful of peas, something small, something you hoped wouldn't be noticed. Eat it immediately, destroy the evidence. Hope you weren't caught. Sometimes you got away with it, sometimes you didn't. The cook inventoried supplies, knew what should be there, knew what was missing. Someone would be accused. Maybe the guilty person, maybe not. The accused would deny it. Everyone denied it. But someone would be punished. Justice was rough, imprecise, but consistent. Theft would be punished. If not the actual thief, then someone poor. Encourager les autres, to encourage the others. To maintain discipline. The fear of punishment kept most sailors honest. Most, not all. The desperate ones still stole, still risked it, still got caught, still got flogged. The cycle continued. Hunger, theft, punishment. More hunger, more theft, more punishment. Forever. Now let's discuss the hierarchy of food, because not everyone ate the same terrible food. The terrible food had gradations. Layers of terribleness. Your rank determined your level of suffering. The common sailors ate what we've been discussing. Hardtack, salt pork, peas, the dregs. The worst of everything. This was the majority of the crew, the people doing the actual work. They got the worst food. This was normal, expected, accepted. The petty officers ate slightly better, same basic food, but more of it. Larger portions. First choice of the salt meat, top of the barrel. Less rotten, less slimy. Still terrible, just less terrible. This was their privilege. Their reward for being slightly higher rank. It wasn't much, but when you are desperate, slightly less terrible is luxury. The warrant officers ate better still. The surgeon, the carpenter, the bosun. They sometimes had their own small supplies, personal stores bought with their own money. Cheese that wasn't moving, jam, preserved fruit. Not much, but something different. Something that wasn't hardtack. They'd eat their official ration, then supplement with their own supplies. This made their diet tolerable, almost adequate. They still got scurvy, still suffered, but less than the common sailors. The commissioned officers, lieutenants, the captain, ate completely differently. They had private stores, extensive stores, wine, port, brandy, real cheese. Cured meats that weren't rotting. Dried fruit, sugar, coffee, tea. They dined in the officers' mess, or in the captain's cabin, away from the crew, on tables, with plates, with utensils, like humans. The captain especially lived well, brought personal supplies for a 6-month voyage, multiple casks of wine port, preserved delicacies. He'd eat multi-course meals while the crew ate hardtack. He'd drink wine while the crew drank green water. This wasn't seen as wrong. This was hierarchy. This was natural order. The captain was important. Fed accordingly. The crew was expendable. Fed accordingly. This disparity was visible, obvious. The crew could smell the officers' food cooking. Different smells. Meat that wasn't rancid. Bread that wasn't full of weevils. The smells would drift through the ship, torture the hungry sailors, remind them of what they didn't have, what they'd never have, as long as they remained common sailors. Some sailors resented this quietly. You couldn't complain openly. Complaining about the hierarchy was mutinous, dangerous, but the resentment was there. Simmering. You'd eat your mouldy hardtack. Smell roast chicken from the officer's mess. Feel anger, hunger, helplessness. This mix of emotions was toxic, dangerous. It contributed to mutinies, to rebellions. to the general atmosphere of suppressed rage that characterized many voyages. But most sailors accepted it. This was how the world worked. Always had been. Always would be. The rich ate better. The poor ate worse. On land, at sea, everywhere. You were poor. You ate poorly. Complaining changed nothing. So you didn't complain. You ate your rations. Did your work, survived, hoped for promotion. Knowing promotion wouldn't come, but hoping anyway. Let's talk about the water situation in more detail, because we've touched on it. But it deserves more attention. Water is life. Bad water is slow death. You were drinking slow death, daily. The water barrels were loaded at the start of the voyage, filled from whatever source was available. Sometimes it was good water, fresh, clean. Spring water, river water. This would last maybe 2 weeks. Then it would start to turn. Sometimes the water was bad from the start. Brackish water. Swamp water already contaminated when it was loaded. This turned bad immediately. Within days. The barrels themselves were the problem, made of wood. The wood had been used before, for wine, for beer. For other cargoes, the wood retained residues, flavors, bacteria. You couldn't clean it out completely. So the water absorbed these flavors. These bacteria became contaminated before it even left port. The barrels were stored in the hold in the dark, in the heat. Perfect conditions for bacterial growth, algae growth, everything growth. The water would become a biology experiment. Life would flourish, thrive. Your drinking water would become a thriving ecosystem. You'd be drinking life, not the good kind of life, the kind that gave you diarrhea, dysentery, typhoid. By month 2, the water was actively hostile. Thick with algae. The colour was impressive, bright green. The brightness indicated how much life was in there, how many photosynthesizing organisms, how much chlorophyll. This would be educational. If you cared about biology, you didn't. You cared about not dying of thirst. So, you drank it. The chunks were the worst part. Not the algae. You got used to algae. The chunks were something else. Dead organisms. Clumps of bacterial growth. Decayed plant matter. Unknown objects. You'd strain them out if you had cloth. If you didn't, you'd swallow them. Try not to think about them. Fail at not thinking about them. Swallow anyway. Some sailors would let the water settle, wait for the chunks to sink to the bottom, pour off the clearer water from the top. This worked somewhat. The top layer was less chunky, still green, still contaminated. But less chunky, you'd take what you could get. Less chunky was a victory. Small victory. Still victory. The taste evolved over the voyage, started woody, became musty, then swampy, then rotten. By month 4, the water tasted like death, like something had died in it. Maybe something had. Rats could fall into barrels, drown, decompose. You'd be drinking rat soup, diluted rat soup. But still, the taste would give it away. Extra protein, you'd tell yourself, extra nutrients. This was a lie, but a comforting lie. The diseases from bad water were numerous. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, various fevers, stomach ailments. You'd drink the water, get sick, recover. Drink more water, get sick again. This cycle repeated. Your immune system was under constant assault. Eventually it would give up, stop fighting. You'd be sick all the time, perpetually ill. This was normal. Everyone was perpetually ill, walking around, working, sailing, while sick. Because sick was the default state. Dehydration was constant despite drinking water. Because the water made you sick, made you have diarrhea. Diarrhea dehydrated you. So you drink more water, get more diarrhea, become more dehydrated. This vicious cycle was hard to break. Some sailors died of dehydration. While drinking water, surrounded by water, their bodies couldn't absorb it, couldn't use it. They'd drink and still waste away. This was maritime life, contradictions and suffering. The beer ration helped when there was beer. Beer was safer, stayed drinkable longer. The alcohol killed some bacteria, not all, but some, enough to make it preferable to water. But beer didn't last. Few weeks, maybe a month. Then it was gone, back to the green water. The terrible, chunky, disease-ridden water. You'd dream of fresh water, clean water. Water that didn't require straining, that didn't have things living in it. This was one of the biggest reliefs of making port, not just fresh food. Fresh water. You'd drink gallons of it, till your stomach sloshed, till you thought you might burst. The joy was immense, overwhelming. You drunk bad water for months, now you could drink good water. This was heaven. Brief heaven. Because soon you'd be back on ship, back to the green water, back to the chunks. But for now, fresh water. You'd savour every gulp. Let's discuss the impact on your body in more detail, month by month. How the terrible food destroyed you. Slowly, systematically. Month 1, you are still relatively healthy. The fresh food from port is running out. You are starting on the preserved rations, hardtack and salt meat. Your body notices. It is not happy, but it can cope. You are eating calories, salt. Some protein, not ideal, but survivable. You feel fine, mostly. A bit more tired than on land, but fine. Month 2, the malnutrition is beginning. You are not getting enough vitamins. No vitamin C, no fresh vegetables. Your energy levels drop. You are tired constantly. The work is harder. Your muscles are weaker. You notice everyone notices. This is normal. The food isn't enough. Your body is consuming its reserves. Fat, then muscle. You are getting thinner. Your face is more gaunt. Your ribs are visible. This is expected. This is what happens. Month 3, the scurvy is starting. You don't know it yet, but it is there. Beginning. Your old scars are weakening. That cut from last year, it is feeling weird, tender, like it might split open. Your gums are slightly swollen. Slightly tender bleeding when you bite into hardtack. You think it is just from the hard food. It is not. It is scurvy. Early scurvy. Your energy is critically low. Getting out of your hammock is hard. Climbing rigging is exhausting. You are breathing heavy after minor exertion. Your heart races. Your body is failing. Shutting down non-essential systems. Conserving energy. Trying to keep you alive on inadequate fuel. Month 4, the scurvy is obvious now. Your gums are purple, swollen, bleeding constantly. You spit blood. Your teeth are loose. You can wiggle them. They hurt. Everything hurts. Your joints ache. Deep, throbbing pain. Your legs hurt. Your arms hurt. Moving is agony. But you move anyway. Because not moving means not working. Not working means no food. So you move. Through pain. Through exhaustion. Bruises appear spontaneously. You wake up with new bruises. Large purple marks. You didn't hit anything. The bruises just appeared. Your blood vessels are failing. Breaking. Leaking blood under your skin. Your body is breaking down, literally, at the cellular level. Your mind is affected too. You are depressed. Deeply depressed. Everything seems hopeless. The voyage will never end. You'll never see land again. You'll die at sea. These thoughts are constant. Overwhelming. Some sailors give up. Stop eating. Stop working. Wait to die. They usually do. Die. Their bodies just shut down. Surrender. This is scurvy. This is what vitamin C deficiency does. Month 5, you are a walking corpse. You've lost maybe 30 pounds. From a body that didn't have 30 pounds to lose. You are skeletal. Your clothes hang off you. Your face is a skull. Eyes sunken. Cheeks hollow. Teeth missing. Gums rotted. You look dead. You feel dead. But you are still working. Still eating. Still surviving. Somehow, your wounds don't heal. You cut yourself. It doesn't heal. Just stays open, weeping. Getting infected. The infection doesn't heal either. Just persists. Your body has no resources for healing. All energy goes to keeping you alive. Keeping your heart beating. Your lungs breathing. Nothing left for repair. You are accumulating damage. Injuries, infections. They'll all need to heal, eventually, if you survive. If month 6 land, finally you can see it. The coastline. The port. Salvation, you can barely walk, barely stand. But you see it. Hope returns. Not much, but some. You'll make it. Probably. Maybe. Hopefully. The ship docks. You stagger off. Can't walk properly. Your legs don't work right. Muscle wasted. Joints damaged. You hobble. Limp. Make your way to the nearest tavern. Order food. Fresh food. They bring it. Bread. Fresh bread. Soft. Still warm, you bite into it. Start crying. You can't help it. It is so good. So impossibly good. You've forgotten food could taste like this. Could be like this. You eat, and eat, and eat. Your stomach rebels. Too much, too fast, too rich. You vomit, violently, painfully. You don't care. You eat more. Vomit again. Eat more. This cycle continues for days. Your body doesn't know what to do with fresh food. Nutrients. Vitamins. It is confused, overwhelmed. but grateful, so grateful. Within a week, the scurvy symptoms start to reverse. The bleeding stops. The bruises fade. The pain lessens. Your body is healing rapidly, miraculously. This is the power of nutrition. Basic nutrition. Your body was designed to do this. Heal, recover. It just needed the materials. The vitamins, the nutrients, now it has them. It is rebuilding, repairing, restoring. Within 2 weeks, you look human again. Still thin, still damaged. But human, your teeth are gone. They won't grow back. Your scars are permanent. But you are alive. You survived. Another voyage. Another 6 months of terrible food. Another brush with death. You survived. And in a month you'll sign up for another voyage. Because this is your job. Your life. You are a sailor. This is what sailors do. Eat terrible food. Get scurvy. Survive. Repeat. Forever. Until you don't survive. Until the scurvy wins. Or the dysentery. Or the typhoid. Or you fall from rigging. Or drown. Or any of the 1,000 ways sailors die. But until then, you sail. You eat hardtack. You drink green water. You survive. This is the truth of maritime food. Not an adventure. Not romantic. Just survival. Grim. Painful, dangerous. Survival. Against odds. Against nature. Against the limitations of food preservation. Against everything. Sailors survived. That is the miracle. Not that they lived well. They didn't. But that they lived at all. On that food, in those conditions, for months. Sometimes years they lived. They worked. They sailed. They discovered. They fought. They built empires. On hardtack and salt pork. On green water and weevils. On nothing. On less than nothing. The resilience is staggering. The determination is inspiring. The suffering is almost incomprehensible. They endured what we couldn't, ate what we wouldn't, survived what would kill us, and they did it repeatedly. Generation after generation, century after century, until finally, mercifully, food technology improved, until refrigeration, until canning, until someone realized that maybe sailors deserved to eat food that wouldn't kill them. Took long enough, 300 years. But eventually, until then, sailors ate terribly, suffered terribly, and somehow, impossibly, magnificently, survived. That is the story. That is the truth. That is what sailors ate on long voyages. It wasn't good, it was survival. And survival, however, grim, however painful, however terrible, is still an achievement. Still remarkable. Still worth remembering. Worth honouring. Worth never forgetting. Because we stand on their shoulders, we eat fresh food because they ate rotten food and lived to tell about it. We drink clean water because they drank contaminated water and survived. We have choices because they had none. We have comfort because they had misery. We should remember, should appreciate, should never take for granted the miracle of modern food, the miracle of refrigeration, of nutrition science, of food safety standards, of everything that keeps us from having to eat like sailors, from having to suffer like sailors, from having to survive like sailors. So the next time you are at a grocery store walking past aisles of fresh food, remember the hardtack, remember the weevils, remember the scurvy, remember the sailors who ate food that would horrify you, who drank water that would poison you, who survived conditions that would break you. Remember them, honor them, and maybe, just maybe, appreciate what you have. Because compared to maritime rations, you have everything. We all do. And we should never forget that. Let's talk about the specific types of preserved meat in more visceral detail, because salt pork and salt beef are generic terms. The reality was more varied, more horrifying, more specific in its terribleness. Salt pork came in grades. The best grade was called prime mess pork. This was from younger animals, better cuts, more carefully preserved. It was still terrible, but less terrible than the alternatives. The meat would be greyish, pink when fresh from the barrel, only slightly slimy. The salt content would be merely overwhelming rather than apocalyptic. You could eat it without your entire mouth shriveling into a raisin. This was luxury. Officers' food. Not for you. The standard grade was cargo pork. This was what you got. Older animals, tougher meat, less careful preservation. The cuts were random. Sometimes you'd get a good piece, a section of shoulder, some belly. Other times you'd get pieces you couldn't identify. Gristle fat, skin with bristles still attached, bone fragments. Unidentifiable chunks that were technically pork, because they came from a pig, but bore no resemblance to meat, as you understood it. The cargo pork would emerge from the barrel grey, dead grey, the colour of a corpse, because that is what it was, dead animal that had been dead for months, preserved in salt. The texture was all wrong. Some parts would be rock hard, dried completely. Other parts would be mushy, decomposing. Despite the salt, you'd get both textures in the same piece. Crunch and slime simultaneously. Your mouth would be confused. Your stomach would be revolted. You'd eat it anyway. Then there was the bottom of the barrel. Literally, when you reached the bottom of the salt pork barrel, what remained was the worst pieces, the ones that had been sitting in brine for the longest, absorbing salt, leaching flavours, decomposing slowly. These pieces would be almost black, dark grey. Black, covered in a white crust of salt crystals. The smell would hit you before you saw them. Death and salt. A powerful combination that made your eyes water. These bottom barrel pieces required special handling. You'd soak them for 2 days, changing the water multiple times, trying to leach out the worst of the salt, the worst of the rot. The water would turn dark, grey, brown, oily. You'd pour it overboard, replace it with fresh seawater, repeat. Eventually the pork would be somewhat edible, somewhat. It would still be incredibly salty, still taste like death, but slightly less so. Progress. Salt beef was worse. Beef doesn't preserve as well as pork. The meat is leaner, less fat to protect it. The preservation process was the same. Pack it in salt, seal it in a barrel, hope for the best. The result was leather. Not like leather, actual leather. You could make shoes out of salt beef. Some sailors did, used old pieces of salt beef as patches for their boots. This tells you everything about the texture. Eating salt beef required tools, not just a knife and fork. Actual tools. Some sailors would put their salt beef ration in a cloth bag, tie it to a rope, drag it behind the ship for several hours. The seawater and motion would soften it slightly, tenderize it through mechanical action and osmosis. Then you'd haul it back up. Cook it. The result would be slightly less inedible. Slightly, this was considered a legitimate food preparation technique. Let that sink in. Dragging your dinner behind the ship for hours to make it chewable. The salt beef that had gone truly bad had a special quality. It would develop a green iridescence. The surface would shimmer. Rainbow colours, like an oil slick. This was bacterial growth. Specific bacteria that created pigments. Beautiful pigments. Toxic pigments. You'd scrape off the iridescent layer. Cook what remained. The heat would kill the bacteria. Probably. Maybe. You'd find out later. If you got sick, the bacteria survived. If you didn't, success. This was food science. Trial and error. Mostly error. There were other preserved meats too. On some ships, some voyages, salted tongue, ox tongue, preserved whole, packed in salt. It would emerge from the barrel looking like a giant slug. Grey, slimy, covered in salt crystals. You'd slice it thin, soak it, cook it. The texture was wrong in ways that are difficult to describe. Spongy and tough simultaneously. The taste was overwhelmingly tongue, not meat. Tongue, a specific flavour, organ meat flavour. Most sailors hated it. Some preferred it to the salt pork, because at least it was different. Novelty had value when every meal was the same. Salted tripe, stomach lining from cattle, preserved in salt. This was rare, but it happened. The tripe would be packed in barrels, transported, distributed. It required extensive preparation, days of soaking, hours of boiling. The result was robbery, flavourless. But it was protein, it was food. You'd eat it, cut into small pieces, boiled until it was vaguely edible, served in a stew, hidden among peas and hardtack pieces. The texture would give it away. Nothing else felt like that in your mouth. Rubbery, chewy, endless. You'd chew for minutes, eventually just swallow it. Move on. Let's talk about the preserved fish in excruciating detail, because fish was theoretically a good protein source. Ships travelled on water. Water had fish. This should work. It didn't work well. Salted cod was the most common. Cod caught in the North Atlantic. Gutted, salted heavily. Dried, the result was called salt fish or hard fish. Both names were accurate. The fish was hard as wood. You couldn't bite through it. You had to beat it with a hammer. Literally, you'd place the dried cod on a flat surface, hit it with a hammer, a mallet, a belaying pin, whatever was available. The fish would crack. Splinter, you'd create pieces small enough to soak and cook. The soaking process took days. You'd put the fish pieces in a barrel of fresh water. Change the water every few hours. The salt would leach out. The fish would soften. After 3 days, it would be ready to cook. Maybe. Sometimes it required longer. You'd test it by trying to bend a piece. If it bent without breaking, it was ready. If it snapped, it needed more soaking. The cooked salt cod had a texture like wet cardboard. Flecky, but also somehow mushy. The taste was overwhelmingly fishy and salty. Fish salt. That is all you could taste. Every bite was fish. Salt, your mouth would pucker. Your nose would wrinkle. You'd eat it anyway. It was protein. It was different from pork variety. Precious variety. But the salt cod that had been stored for too long developed problems. It would grow hair, not metaphorical hair. Actual fuzzy growth. White, grey, mould filaments extending from the flesh. The fish would be covered in this fur. You'd scrape it off, soak the fish, the mould would come back. You'd scrape it off again. Eventually you'd give up scraping and just cook it. The heat would kill the mould, turn it into harmless protein. Probably the fish would taste off, more off than usual. But edible, technically edible. Some ships carried pickled herring, small fish preserved in vinegar and salt. These would be packed in barrels. Hundreds of fish, layered with salt, covered in vinegar, sealed. The vinegar would preserve them, also make them inedible. The combination of vinegar and salt created a flavor profile that can only be described as aggressive. The fish would attack your mouth, assault your taste buds. Your eyes would water, your nose would run. You'd eat 3 or 4. Feel like you'd been punched in the face by flavor. Stop eating. Save the rest for tomorrow. Face. Punch yourself again the next day. The herrings would sometimes develop a special quality after months of storage. They'd ferment. The vinegar and salt would create conditions for specific bacteria. Anaerobic fermentation. The fish would develop gas. Pressure would build in the barrel. You'd open it and hear a hiss, like opening a bottle of soda. The smell that emerged would be indescribable. Rotten eggs, ammonia, dead fish, all combined, concentrated, weaponized. The fermented herrings were considered a delicacy by some, disgusting by most. They'd have a new texture, soft. The bones would have dissolved in the acid. You could eat the whole fish, bones and all. The flavor was intense, beyond intense. It would change your mouth chemistry. Everything you ate for the next day would taste like fermented herring. Water would taste like fermented herring. The air you breathed would taste like it. This flavor would haunt you, possess you. Eventually fade. You'd eat fermented herring again next week. The cycle continued. Now, let's discuss the ship's biscuit in even more detail, because we've talked about hardtack. But there were varieties, differences, gradations of terrible. The standard Navy hardtack was made to specification. 4 inches by 4 inches, half an inch thick, baked multiple times. These were mass-produced, made in bakeries that specialized in ship's biscuit. The quality was consistent, consistently terrible, but at least you knew what you were getting. Then there was merchant ship hardtack, made by whoever had the contract. Quality varied wildly. Some was almost as good as Navy biscuit. Some was worse, much worse. Thinner, more fragile, or thicker. Even harder. The baking was inconsistent. Some pieces would be burnt. Black, charred. These were actually preferred. The burnt parts were harder, less likely to get weevily. The weevils didn't like the burnt flavor. This was the only time burnt food was an advantage. The flour quality varied too. Good flour made better hardtack. Still terrible. But better terrible. Cheap flour made worse hardtack. This was flour mixed with sawdust. Literally. Unscrupulous bakers would mix in sawdust to stretch the flour. Increase profits. The sawdust didn't affect the texture much. Hardtack was already wooden. Adding actual wood didn't change much. But it did reduce the nutritional value, from minimal to none. You'd be eating wood, calling it bread. Your body would get nothing from it. You'd stay hungry, always hungry. Some hardtack was sweetened. Rare, but it existed. A tiny amount of sugar added to the dough. This was for officers. Special occasions. The sweetened biscuit was lighter in colour, slightly more pleasant to eat. Still hard, still weevily, but sweet. That tiny amount of sugar made a difference. Psychological difference. It was a treat. Something to look forward to. Your annual sweet biscuit. You'd save it. Make it last. Eat it slowly. Savour it. This was dessert. This was luxury. The age of the hardtack mattered. Fresh hardtack was actually edible. If you got hardtack that had been made recently, within a few months, it was relatively good. Still hard, but not impossibly hard. The weevils hadn't had time to infest it fully. You could eat it without breaking teeth. This was remarkable. New sailors would marvel at fresh hardtack. Think the food wasn't that bad. They'd learn. By month 3, the hardtack would be old. By month 6, ancient. By the end of a long voyage, you'd be eating hardtack that was older than some of the sailors, made years ago. Stored. Redistributed. Stored again. Finally issued to you. Archaeological artifact. Disguised as food. The storage conditions affected the hardtack too. Dry storage was best. The biscuit would stay hard. Dry weevily, yes, but structurally sound. Wet storage was disaster. If seawater got into the hardtack barrels, the biscuit would absorb moisture, become soft, then mouldy, green mould, black mould, white fuzzy mould. All the moulds. The mould would grow throughout the biscuit. You couldn't just scrape it off. It would be everywhere. Internal, you'd eat mouldy biscuit and hope the mould wasn't toxic. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was. You'd find out. Let's talk about the dried peas in more detail, because peas were the vegetable component. The only vegetable component for months at a time. They deserved attention. Horrible, detailed attention. The peas were purchased dried, already dehydrated. Hard as pebbles, they came in large sacks, hundreds of pounds per sack. These would be stored in the hold, where they would absorb moisture from the humid air. The sacks would swell slightly. The peas would too. But not evenly. Some would swell. Others wouldn't. This created a texture nightmare when you cooked them. The pea weevils were inevitable. Little beetles. They'd be in the peas when they were purchased. The adult beetles would lay eggs inside individual peas. You couldn't see the eggs, too small. The peas would be loaded onto the ship. During the voyage, the eggs would hatch. The larvae would eat the pea from the inside, grow, eventually emerge. The sacks would be full of beetles. The peas would be full of larvae. Holes, frass. This was expected. Standard. You dealt with it. The way you dealt with it was simple. You didn't. You just cooked the peas, weevils and all. The boiling would kill the larvae. The beetles would float to the top. You'd skim them off, or not. Some protein-conscious sailors would leave them in. Grind them up with the peas, extra nutrition. This wasn't official, but it was common. Waste nothing. Even the pests were food. The cooking process for peas was extensive. You'd soak them overnight, then boil for hours. The goal was to create peas pudding, a thick paste made from peas. It should be smooth, uniform. In reality, it was lumpy. Some peas dissolved completely, became mush. Others stayed hard, rock hard. Indestructible. You'd have both textures in the same spoonful, mush and rocks. Your mouth confused, your teeth endangered. You ate anyway. The peas pudding would be grey, green, not the vibrant green of fresh peas. A dead green. Greyish, the colour of plant matter that had given up on life. The taste was vaguely pea, like if peas had no flavour and a strange aftertaste, metallic, slightly sour. The aftertaste would linger, stay in your mouth for hours. Everything you ate afterward would taste like old peas. Water would taste like pea water. This was your life. Sometimes the peas would be cooked with salt pork. The combination was called peas soup. The pork would add fat flavour. Salt. So much salt. The result would be a grey-green soup with chunks of grey meat floating in it. Visually unappealing, doesn't begin to describe it. It looked like pond water with debris. Tasted like salt and regret. You'd eat a bowl. Be hungry an hour later. Because peas soup was mostly water. The peas had no substance. The pork was mostly salt. You'd consume a bowl of nothing. Call it dinner. Stay hungry. The dried beans, when ships carried them, were even worse than peas. Harder, took longer to cook. Required more fuel to soften. Fuel was precious. Fire was dangerous. Cooking beans all night was risky. But sometimes you had to. The beans would be soaked, boiled, soaked more, boiled more. Eventually they'd soften. Slightly, you could bite through them without breaking teeth. Usually, sometimes, the texture was mealy, grainy. The taste was bean. Just bean. Overwhelming bean. Ness. No other flavour. Just bean. You'd eat your beans. Taste bean for hours afterward. Dream of anything else. Wake up. Eat more beans. The cycle continued. Let's talk about the ship's environment where this food was eaten, because context matters. The food was terrible. The eating environment made it worse. Below decks where meals were often eaten was a special kind of hell. Dark. The only light came from a few oil lamps, sputtering, smoky casting flickering shadows. You'd eat in near darkness. This was actually preferable. What you couldn't see couldn't disturb you. The contents of your bowl were better left mysterious. Shadows were kindness. The air below decks was thick, humid, heavy. The smell was indescribable. Hundreds of unwashed men, wet wood, bilge water, mold. The smell of the food being cooked, the smell of the food being eaten, the smell of the food being digested, all combined, layered, concentrated. You'd breathe this air while eating. Every breath tasted like the ship, like decay, like salt water and despair. The deck where you sat was never stable. The ship rolled, constantly. Your bowl would slide. You'd catch it, hold it steady, bring a spoon to your mouth. The ship would pitch, the spoon would miss, hit your cheek, your nose, splash stew on your shirt. This was normal. Every meal was a battle against motion, against the sea. You developed techniques. Hold the bowl between your knees. Stabilize with your legs. Spoon with one hand. Brace with the other. Eat quickly before the ship's motion defeated you. In rough weather, eating was nearly impossible. The ship would pitch violently. Your bowl would fly. The contents would spill. You'd lose your dinner to the deck. Watch it run across the boards. Mix with seawater. Gone. Your meal. Wasted. You'd lick the bowl. Get what little remained. Still be hungry. This happened regularly. Storm meals were gambles. Sometimes you won. Sometimes the sea won. The sea won more often. The temperature was wrong. Always below decks in the tropics was hell. Over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Humid. You'd sweat while eating. Drip sweat into your food. Didn't matter. Everything was already salty. Your sweat just added authenticity. You'd eat your hot stew in the heat. Feel like you might faint. Drink warm water. Feel worse. This was dinner in the Caribbean. Below decks in winter was freezing. Your hands would be numb. Holding a spoon was difficult. The food would cool rapidly. Turn from hot stew to cold congealed mass in minutes. You'd eat quickly. Before it froze, the fat would solidify. The peas would harden. You'd be eating cold, solid food in the freezing bar. This was dinner in the North Atlantic. The eating surface was whatever you could find. Sit on the deck. Crouch on a sea chest. Perch on a coil of rope. Balance on a barrel. There were no tables, no chairs, no dining area. You ate wherever you fit, wherever you could find space. Alongside 30 other men, all eating, all crowded, all miserable. This was communal dining. Not in the pleasant sense, in the desperate, cramped, no choice sense. The bowl you ate from was shared, not just between meals, during meals. One bowl might serve 3 sailors. You'd eat your portion, pass the bowl. Next person would eat. Then the next. The spoon was shared too, passed around. Everyone's mouth had been on it. Everyone's germs transferred. Diseases spread this way. Efficiently, inevitably. You got sick, recovered, got sick again. This was the system. The bowl wasn't washed between meals. Not properly. It would be rinsed with seawater, maybe. Wiped with a dirty rag, maybe. Usually just turned upside down to drain. The residue from the last meal would dry, crust on the inside. This would mix with the next meal, add flavour, previous meals haunting future meals. Layer upon layer of accumulated residue. The bowl itself was disgusting. What you put in it was disgusting. Together they created compound disgust. You ate from it anyway, because it was your bowl, your assigned eating vessel. You had no other. Now let's discuss the psychological impact in more detail, because the physical effects of bad food were obvious. The mental effects were insidious, devastating, permanent. The monotony broke minds. Same food, every day, for months. Years for career sailors. Your brain would rebel, crave variety, novelty, anything different. You'd fantasize about food obsessively. Not occasionally, constantly, all the time. During work, during rest, during sleep. Food dreams, food thoughts. Food became your entire mental landscape. You'd describe meals in excruciating detail. To anyone who'd listen, the roast you had 5 years ago, every element, the meat, the vegetables, The gravy. How it tasted, how it smelled. How it felt in your mouth. You'd talk for an hour about one meal. Your listener would either join in with their own food memories or tell you to shut up. Usually shut up, because hearing about good food while eating bad food was torture. Some sailors would refuse to talk about food at all, wouldn't discuss it, wouldn't think about it. Eating was mechanical. Fuel. Nothing more. Don't think, don't remember, don't hope, just eat. Survive. This was protection. Emotional armor against the pain of knowing what food could be. What you were missing, what you'd never have at sea. The anger was constant, simmering, directed at everyone. At the cook, at the officers, at the captain, at the voyage, at life. Why were you eating this? Why was this considered acceptable? Why did the officers eat better? The unfairness was obvious, undeniable. You couldn't change it. So the anger stayed, internalized, compressed, dangerous. Sometimes the anger exploded. Fights over food. Someone got a larger portion, real or imagined. You'd fight, actually fight. Punches, violence. Over an extra ounce of pork. This seems insane from the outside. Makes perfect sense when you are starving. When you are desperate. When fairness is all you have. Unfairness was existential threat. You defend against it. Violently, if necessary. The depression was worse than the anger. The total hopelessness. The knowledge that this would continue. Tomorrow. Next week. Next month. The same terrible food. Forever. No escape. No relief. No variation. Just endless hardtack and salt pork until you died. Some sailors gave up. Stopped caring. Stopped fighting. Stopped living internally. They'd eat mechanically. Work mechanically. Exist mechanically. Shells of people. The food had killed their spirit. Their body would follow eventually. The relief of making port was almost too intense to handle. Land fresh food. The anticipation would build for weeks. As the voyage neared its end, as the food ran lower, as everyone got hungrier, the excitement would be overwhelming. Palpable. You could feel it on the ship. The energy. The hope. Land meant food. Real food. Salvation. When you finally ate fresh food, the emotional reaction was extreme. Grown men would cry, weep openly, over bread, over fruit, over fresh meat. This wasn't weakness. Months of deprivation ending. The relief was physical, mental, spiritual. You'd cry while eating, not from sadness, from overwhelming joy, from the simple pleasure of food that tasted like food, of not being hungry, of being human again. But the joy was temporary because you knew, in a few weeks, maybe a month, you'd sign up for another voyage, more hardtack, more salt pork, more hunger, more suffering. And knowing this, knowing the cycle would continue, choosing it anyway, because this was your life, your job, your identity. Sailor. Suffered, survived, repeated. Let's talk about specific nationalities and their maritime food cultures, because different countries had different terrible foods. The British Navy had its systems. Other nations had theirs. All terrible, differently terrible. The British Navy was famous for its hardtack and salt pork. This was the standard. The baseline, all British sailors ate this. For centuries the consistency was remarkable, consistently terrible. But at least you knew what to expect. The British Navy also pioneered the lime juice ration. Eventually, after losing thousands of sailors to scurvy, they figured out citrus prevented scurvy, started issuing lime juice, mandatory. This saved lives, made British sailors healthier than their counterparts. Not healthy, just less unhealthy. This was progress. The Spanish Navy had different rations, included olive oil, garlic, wine instead of beer. This sounds better. It wasn't much better. The olive oil would go rancid during long voyages. Smell like vomit. Taste worse. The garlic would help. Add flavor. Make the terrible food slightly less terrible. The wine would last longer than British beer. Taste better. Get you slightly drunk. This was an advantage. Small advantage. Still advantage. The Dutch Navy ate a lot of salted herring. This was their specialty. Their national dish. They'd pickle herrings by the barrel. Eat them regularly. Supplement with hardtack peas. Cheese. The cheese was Dutch cheese, which meant it was good cheese, by land standards. By sea, it still moved. Still had mites, but started from a higher quality baseline. The herring was fresh caught. well preserved, as good as pickled herring could be, which wasn't very good, but better than alternatives. The French Navy had the best food, relatively. They'd carry wine, mandatory wine rations, good wine, or wine that started good, would eventually turn to vinegar. But for the first few months, actual good wine. They'd also carry different dried foods, lentils, dried vegetables, attempts at variety. The attempts would fail. Everything would still taste terrible. But the effort was there. The French also had better cooks, trained cooks, who could make terrible ingredients slightly less terrible through technique. This was French cuisine, even at sea. Make suffering slightly more elegant. The American ships varied widely. No standardization. Every ship different. Every voyage different. Some captains provided well. Others didn't. American sailors might eat hardtack and salt pork, British style, or beans and bacon, American frontier style, or whatever was cheap, whatever was available. This unpredictability was stressful. You never knew what you'd get. Sometimes you got lucky, sometimes very unlucky. It was a gamble, every voyage. The Chinese junks had completely different food. Rice, dried fish, preserved vegetables, tea. Lots of tea. This was foreign to Western sailors, exotic, different, also terrible. The rice would get weevilly, the fish would rot, the vegetables would mold, different foods. The tea was an advantage, real advantage. Tea stayed drinkable, provided comfort, warmth, flavor. Chinese sailors were better off than most. At least they had tea. The African slave ships had the worst food by design. The enslaved people being transported were cargo, not crew. Fed minimal rations, survival rations. Barely enough to keep them alive. Sometimes not enough. Many died. From starvation, from disease, from despair. The crew ate better, but not much better. They were complicit in horror, fed accordingly. Terrible food for terrible work. Justice of a sort. Cosmic justice. Still terrible. Now let's talk about the food, related diseases beyond scurvy. Because scurvy was the famous one, the killer. But there were others, many others. All from the food, or lack thereof. Beriberi was common, caused by lack of thiamine, vitamin B1. You got it from eating nothing but white rice, or nothing but processed grains. The symptoms started with weakness, fatigue. This was normal, everyone was weak and fatigued. So it went unnoticed. Then came the numbness. Your feet would go numb, tingle. This was concerning. Your hands would follow. Numbness, spreading. Eventually paralysis. Your legs wouldn't work. You'd be unable to walk, unable to work. Useless. They'd carry you off the ship eventually, if you survived. Many didn't. Pellagra was another vitamin deficiency disease, niacin, vitamin B3. The symptoms were called the 4Ds dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, death. In that order, your skin would develop a rash, red, scaly, painful. Exposed to sun, it would get worse, burn. Peel, blister. The diarrhea was constant, painful, bloody sometimes. You'd waste away, unable to absorb nutrients. The dementia was worst. You'd lose your mind, become confused, disoriented, hallucinate. Eventually you'd die, confused alone, covered in rashes. This was pellagra. This was maritime life. Dysentery was universal. Everyone got it, multiple times. It was caused by contaminated water, contaminated food, contaminated everything. The symptoms were violent diarrhea, bloody stool, cramping, dehydration. You'd shit yourself. Literally. No warning. No control. Just sudden, violent evacuation. This was humiliating. Dangerous. Dehydrating. You'd drink water to replace what you lost. The water was contaminated. You'd get more dysentery. The cycle was vicious. Endless. Some sailors had dysentery for months, continuously. Their bodies just gave up trying to fight it. Accepted it as the new normal. Chronic dysentery. Forever. Typhoid fever came from contaminated water too. Different bacteria. Worse outcomes. You'd develop a high fever. Exhaustion. Confusion. Rose. Coloured spots on your chest. Constipation. Then diarrhea. Then hemorrhaging. Internal bleeding. You'd die slowly, over weeks. Delirious. Fevered. Bleeding internally. Your companions would watch. Helpless. Knowing they might be next. Fear was contagious. Typhoid was too. Cholera was the worst. Fast, efficient, deadly. You'd develop sudden violent diarrhea, vomiting. Both at the same time. You'd lose fluids faster than you could replace them. Dehydrate completely within hours. Your skin would turn blue. Your eyes would sink into your skull. Your hands would wrinkle like you'd been in water for days. Except you were dying of thirst. The contradiction was horrible. You'd die within 24 hours of first symptoms. Maybe 48 if you were strong. The crew would throw your body overboard immediately before the disease spread. This was cholera. This was terror. Let's talk about the rats in even more detail, because the rats deserve it. They were everywhere. Integral to ship life. Unavoidable. Numerous. The ships left port with rats. Always. Rats would board while the ship was docked, looking for food. Find it in the cargo hold. The food stores. The ship would sail. The rats would come along. Unwanted passengers. They'd find the food barrels. Gnaw through the wood. Eat the contents. The hardtack. The peas. The cheese. They'd thrive, multiply. Reproduce fast. One pregnant female rat could produce dozens of offspring in a voyage. Those offspring would reproduce. Soon you'd have a rat population in the hundreds, thousands, on larger ships. The rats lived in the hold, in the walls, in the cargo, in your personal belongings. They'd chew through anything. Sea chests, clothing, hammocks. They'd make nests in your spare shirt. You'd reach for it, find a nest of baby rats. Pink, naked squeaking. You'd throw them overboard. The mother rat would be angry. Rats could be aggressive when defending their young. They'd bite. Rat bites were dangerous, would get infected. You'd develop a fever, might die from a rat bite. This happened regularly. The rats would come out at night. When you were sleeping, they'd crawl over you, looking for food. Crumbs in your hammock. Spills on your clothes. They'd walk across your face, your chest, your legs. You'd wake up, feel something, brush it off. It would squeak, run away. You'd go back to sleep. This was every night. You got used to it. Stopped waking up, the rats would have free rein. While you slept, they'd explore taste. Investigate. You were just terrain to them. An obstacle course, with occasional food crumbs. Some rats would fall into the water barrels, swim around, can't get out, drown. Your drinking water would contain dead rat. You'd taste it, sweetish, off. You'd know. Wonder if you should stop drinking. Decide that dead rat water was better than no water. Drink it. Survive. This was a Tuesday. The ship's cat was supposed to control the rats. Every ship had a cat. Sometimes several. They were valued, fed, cared for. The cat would hunt, kill rats, eat them. This helped. Slightly. But one cat versus 1,000 rats was not a fair fight. The cat would kill maybe 2 or 3 rats. But Dalton, why? The rats would reproduce faster than that. The population would still grow. The cat tried. Everyone appreciated the effort. But it wasn't enough. Some sailors would hunt rats for sport, for food, for both. They'd set traps. Primitive box traps, baited with hardtack crumbs. The rats would enter. The trap would spring, caught. The sailor would kill it, skin it, cook it. Fresh meat. Fresher than anything else on board. This was a luxury. A treat. You'd share your rat with your watchmates. Everyone would get a bite. Tiny bite. But fresh. Not salted. Not preserved. Just cooked. This was fine dining. This was what you looked forward to. The rats would also eat each other when food was scarce. When the ship's stores ran low, the rats would turn cannibal. Bigger rats would kill smaller rats. Eat them. This created a selection pressure. Only the biggest, strongest, most aggressive rats survived. By the end of a long voyage, the remaining rats were enormous. Fearless, battle-hardened. These rats would challenge the cat, fight over territory, sometimes win. A rat that had survived 6 months at sea was a formidable creature. Survivor, fighter, respected, even while being hunted. Let's talk about the absolute final weeks of a voyage when food ran critically low. When rationing became desperate. When survival was uncertain. The hardtack would be gone, completely gone. Every crumb, every weevil, eaten. The barrels would be empty, scraped clean. You'd look at the empty barrel, feel despair. No more hardtack. This was your staple, your primary food, gone. The salt meat would be gone too, or nearly gone. The last few pieces would be rotting, obviously inedible even by maritime standards. But you'd look at them, consider. Hunger would make you consider. You'd reject them. For now. Check again tomorrow. Maybe they'd look better tomorrow. They wouldn't. But hunger would lower your standards. Eventually you'd eat them. The peas would be down to the dregs, the broken pieces. The ones that were too small to bother with normally. Now they were precious. Every pea mattered. You'd count them. Divide them fairly. 7 peas per person. This was dinner. You'd eat your 7 peas. Chew them slowly. Make them last. Still be hungry. Obviously be hungry. 7 peas wasn't dinner. It was a joke. A cruel joke. But it was all you had. The water would be critical. Running low, rationed strictly. A cup per Dalton Y, maybe less. The cup would be measured carefully. Everyone watching, making sure the distribution was fair. Your cup of green, chunky, contaminated water. You drink it slowly, make it last. Hydrate as much as possible on this tiny amount. It wasn't enough. You'd be dehydrated. Constantly. Your lips cracked. Your tongue swollen. Your urine dark. Almost brown. Your body shutting down. But you'd survive. Probably. Maybe. Hopefully. The desperation would drive creativity. You'd catch rainwater. If it rained. Set out any container. Cups, bowls. Buckets. Even your shirt. Spread it out. Let it catch rain. Wring it out into a cup. Drink the water. It would taste like shirt. Like salt. Like sweat. But it was water. Extra water. Beyond your ration. This was wealth. This was survival. You'd catch fish. Try to. Fishing from a moving ship was hard. But when you are desperate, you try. Someone would catch something. Maybe. A small fish. It would be divided among everyone. 30 men. 1 fish. Everyone would get a tiny piece. A bite. 1 bite of fresh fish. You chew it thoroughly. Extract every molecule of nutrition. Swallow, reluctantly. Wish there was more. There wasn't. You'd eat things that weren't food. Leather belts. Shoes. Anything made from animal hide. You'd cut it into small pieces. Boil it for hours. The leather would soften slightly. Still be leather, but slightly chewable. You'd eat your belt. Your shoes. Whatever you had. The leather had no nutrition, but it filled your stomach. Created the illusion of eating. The illusion of satisfaction. It was neither. But it was something. You'd eat the rats. Actively hunt them aggressively. The rats were food. Mobile food. Food that fought back, but food. You'd set every trap you could make. Hunt them with sticks. With clubs. Kill every rat you could find. The rat population would drop. The survivors would get harder to catch, smarter, faster, more cautious. But you'd persist. Hunt them. Eat them. Survive on them. The ship's cat would disappear. Someone would eat it. Not officially. Not openly. But the cat would be there one day. Gone the next. Nobody would ask. Nobody would ask. Everyone would know. The cat was meat. Someone got desperate enough. End of story. Land would appear eventually if you were lucky. If the navigation was accurate. If the winds cooperated. If you survived. You'd see the coastline. Salvation. The entire crew would cheer. Cry. Celebrate. You'd made it, barely. But you'd made it. Or you wouldn't. Some ships didn't make it. Got lost. Ran out of food. Ran out of water. Ran out of time. The crew would die. One by one. From starvation. From thirst. From disease. The ship would drift. A ghost ship. Full of corpses. Eventually it would be found. Or it wouldn't. The sea would keep its secrets. The sailors would be forgotten. Another tragedy. Another statistic. Another cautionary tale about maritime life. But most ships made it. Most sailors survived. Not all, but most. And they'd stagger off the ship. Emaciated. Sick, damaged. But alive. They'd find food. Fresh food. Eat themselves sick. Recover. Rest. Rebuild. And then impossibly, inexplicably, they'd sign up for another voyage because this was their life. This was who they were. Sailors. This is what sailors did. This is the complete truth about maritime food. Not an adventure story. Not a romantic tale of the sea. Just truth. Grim. Brutal. Honest truth. Sailors ate terrible food. Suffered terribly. And somehow survived generation after generation. Century after century. Until technology finally caught up. Until refrigeration. Canning. Nutritional science. Until the world decided maybe sailors deserved better than hardtack and scurvy. They deserved better all along. They didn't get it. But they survived anyway. And that survival, that endurance, that stubborn refusal to die, despite eating food that tried to kill them, that is the real story. That is what matters. That is what we should remember. The sailors who ate the impossible, drank the undrinkable, survived the unsurvivable, and did it all again. Voyage after voyage, until they couldn't anymore. Until age, injury, disease, death finally stopped them. We owe them everything we have, every maritime discovery, every trade route, every colony, every empire, built on their suffering, their hunger, their terrible, terrible food. We should never forget that. Never take for granted what they endured, what they survived, what they sacrificed so that eventually, centuries later, we could have the world we have, the food we have, the choices we have. So remember the hardtack, remember the weevils, remember the scurvy, remember the sailors, always remember the sailors, and maybe appreciate your next meal just a little bit more, because compared to what they ate, everything you eat is a miracle, everything, and that is the truth.